All right. What's up, YouTube and Asmon lovers like me? For like my people watching me on stream right now, you're gonna be kind of annoyed by this, but I just need to like preface some of this that I am a professional game designer with over 10 years of experience designing games, and I run my own studio now. And so when I talk about this, consider some of that pretext there. That I'm going to be like mentioning things like from a developer's perspective that this could have a problem with. I know that there's been mixed opinions about what Pirate Software has said. I know that I said some things regarding the original video. I think it was even part of my Kickstarter review days. Something about Kickstarter with the original Stop Killing Games comes to mind, and I can't remember when I reacted to the first video, but I know it was earlier this year, or I'm pretty sure it was earlier this year. Either way, Pirate Software said some things, there have been some new developments, some changes to the original plan, and I just want to give this a fair shot going in and see what people think. Yeah, it's a whole thing. We're going to watch the video of Asmon reacting to Pirate Software's video, so we're going to react to him. Let's set up the display here and get going without further ado. Alright. Let's jump in.
My name is Jay.
Oh God.
My name is Jason Thor Hall, also known as Pirate Software Online. I've
Yeah.
been in the gaming industry for about 20 years. I used
More
to
than me.
work at Blizzard Entertainment, then Amazon Game Studios, and now I own my own studio, Pirate Software.
I have my own studio too.
Studio, and I've been here for about 8
Just
years.
like us.
I also run a massive community. We've got about 180,000 people in
I don't have that
Discord,
many
and
people.
Most of what I do is try to teach other people how to make games, teach them that they can make games, show them the tools to do so, and try to do everything without any paywalls or bullshit.
Look at us,
It's
3
incredibly
people on the bottom
important to
here.
me that we keep making games and that the next generation has the tools to do so that our medium doesn't die out.
Okay.
And it never will. And that's the whole intention of all of this. So with that in mind, that community brought me this and tried to get me to sign it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. Number one, I can't because I don't live in Europe. But number two, I wouldn't sign it even if I could. And I'm going to kind of go through this and try to explain.
I have not read... like I said, I watched an original video, or for some reason I was thinking it was part of like Kickstarter, but I may have just been watching it on there. Asmon looks prepped to be offended. Yeah, I mean, I know Pirate Software's been getting a lot of flack for what he's been saying, so I just want to I want to go in with like a fresh, open mind. I know that I originally watched some stuff, but maybe things have changed, because I was not very on board with it originally for a lot of reasons, and before anybody gets, flaming me for that, there's a lot of peculiarities to game development, especially multiplayer game development, that may make this not great for players. I know that sounds weird. You'd think like, oh, well, we get to play games forever, or, some games forever. It's like, well, if they get made at all, because there's increases to costs with this. Like I said, I'll give it a chance. We'll get into it, and then we'll see. Maybe my opinion has changed based on some modifications to the original goals and intentions with the laws.
Explain the reasoning as to why
Okay.
that would be the case, without all of the internet hate machine that's grown up around it. So let's go into how this works and why this is an issue to me. First things first, what is an initiative? So an initiative is actually not law. It is something that you put together so you can put it up in front of representatives and they can start the conversation. The reason why I have a problem with Stop Killing Games is specifically it starts the wrong conversation. If we're trying to kill off the practice of developers putting together a live service game, pitching it as a single-player experience, and then taking away support in the future, this ain't it. And the reason why is specifically on...
I mean, is that what it's specifically about, though? I mean, let me hear that again, because I need to just hear that again.
Future service game to kill off the practice of developers putting together a live service game, pitching it as a single-player experience, and then taking away support in the future, this ain't it.
Okay, yeah, that is a practice that I don't like. Like, here's single-player game, oh, we're going to keep updating it with new things, and then they just stop updating it, and then it's kind of like a half-baked game at the end, right? Because, of course, a lot of developers and a lot of publishers want to make some live service content because they get to, generate money over a period of time rather than big spike and then, slowly dipping off, which is how single player games generally look if you look at purchases and user reviews. If we ignore things like DLCs, some big update like with Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree, or with Sale or something, right? So I agree. I don't like that practice either. I don't think that's what this petition was at all targeting, though. It was, from my understanding, this petition is targeting. Specifically, it started from the crew, right? Ubisoft is taking the crew offline, and yeah. So they're taking the crew offline, and players wanted to say, well, why don't you just give us the ability to play it single player or host our own servers for it, right? And I get that. Okay, I'll back it up for people who don't know. There's a petition called Stop Killing Games, which, from my understanding, and note that this is from my understanding, is to create laws that are put in place to prevent developers and publishers from making multiplayer games that then they take the servers offline in the future and the game becomes unplayable, right? So if a game like, for people, maybe one that's really commonly known, let's just say, I don't know, Fortnite, I guess. That's kind of a big one, but multiplayer game, you could only play Helldivers. Yep, only multiplayer game. You cannot play it single player. You need to connect to an online server in order to run it at all. So if you take those servers offline, the game becomes unplayable. And another example would be like Mag for the PS3, right? The first, as far as I know, the first 256 player first person shooter, and it was on the PS3. And after it lost a lot of its player base, they took the servers offline. It's unplayable now. I agree. I would like to see that changed. My problem with some of the original discussion points was that I don't feel like the points would have fixed it, and there wasn't enough discussion about the caveats as to how this is going to impact development, especially timeline, costs, and whether players can even run servers like that on their own. I understand you're going to say, oh, well, there's WoW private servers. Well, I get it. There are other private servers for other multiplayer games too, but not every multiplayer game can work like that. Every single one is different. It's a different implementation, different infrastructure. There's different security hurdles. It really has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Would disincentivize developing these kind of games? I agree with that too, because the increased cost of an already massively expensive genre of games is just going to make publishers be more wary. So, I don't know. What if something unexpected happens? Should those circumstances fall under those laws? I don't know. I'll say this. We're 1.5 minutes into this video, but I'll say this. I emailed Ross last night, the creator of Stop Killing Games. He and I are going to try and work out having a call on stream and just casually talking about it. Not like putting him in the hot seat or anything, but just, I'm going to prepare some questions. Hopefully, he can answer them and dissuade my concerns. And we can just, clear the air for me and any of my viewers and anybody watching the video. So we're trying to set that up. There's nothing for certain yet, but he just emailed me back and we're in contact. So at the very least, I get to talk to the person who has created this initiative, and we can come to an understanding of that. So let's keep going with the video, though, and see what happens.
And the reason why is specifically on this initiative, under its own description, it says, this initiative calls to require publishers that sell or license video games to consumers in the European Union or related features and assets sold for video games they operate to leave said video games in a functional playable state. Specifically, the initiative seeks to prevent the remote disabling of video games by the publishers before providing reasonable means to continue functioning of said video games without the involvement from the side of the publisher.
Okay.
This isn't...
And, okay. Yeah, and to me, just these two paragraphs here, just what I've heard right here, I see a lot of red flags, right? And I'm sure that is continued down here. We can look at the exact post itself as we get further in the video. Does not seek to acquire ownership of said video games, associated intellectual rights or monetization rights. Neither does it expect the publisher to provide resources for the said video game once they discontinue it while leaving it in a reasonably functional playable state. Okay, so that's a big one. So It does not expect the publisher, I would assume that also means developer, to provide resources for the said video game. So once they provide the playable version, they don't seek to force developers or publishers to make a bug fix or something for something in the server code or whatever. However, one of my biggest problems that I already see with this, and something I've mentioned before, is that a lot of these servers for games use third-party integrations and management of like players or security that they purchase the license for. And if they can't distribute this because that would be breaking their contracts, right? They'd be getting a lot of legal trouble for distributing this to players. It's the same thing like when you, technically when you buy like a movie, on like a, I don't know, let's just say some pay-per-view thing, right? You're buying to watch the movie for like $3. YouTube, perfect example. You are allowed to watch that yourself. You are not allowed to redistribute that, right? You're buying the license to view that on your own. And the same thing when developers purchase the rights to use certain applications or plugins or whatever in their games, they are allowed to use that in that game and distribute that game with it. But they cannot distribute the source for other people to use, which either means one of two things. Either that the games with those aspects to them are probably going to be exempt from this law, or it's going to force developers who need to make a multiplayer game to develop their own solutions, cutting out all that third-party software, which is either going to result in a lot of problems for game developers, or it's going to dramatically increase costs of developing it because now they need to hire more programmers to create these things that handle like the back end of the server management. That's a big problem that I have with this. I don't know if that's covered in this website. We'll check it out after the video. Let's keep going with this. That's just, I want to put that out there, that's one of the biggest problems I have with this so far.
Without the involvement from the side of the publisher.
Okay.
This isn't always possible in all video games, and it doesn't call out the specific practice that this is supposedly trying to defeat. It is incredibly vague and will damage all live service games. How would you keep League of Legends in a functional playable state? You'd have to re-architect the entire game. The game is what is...
Well, that's what people do. Yeah, there's a lot of people that have done that. Like, people did that with WoW. Yeah, there's a lot of examples of that. Sure. No, it's definitely hard to do.
But every multiplayer game is different. It's not like every single game is made in the same engine with the same server architecture, with the same type of security and handshake. It's all different. It's all different. And while it may be easy to do with some clients, with some games, it's definitely not easy to do with others. And if you take a lot of games with these shared open worlds, right, with like let's say shards, and I assume that WoW probably has something similar where you have tons of players, there is probably a way to, scale it. But there's also going to be a problem with how do you even run some of these games on a reasonable architecture at a consumer level. I would imagine that there are probably some MMO games especially that just this can't be done with, right? People did it with WoW is such a weak argument. All those are illegal and basically stolen code. Are they technically illegal? Are WoW private servers technically illegal? Are they just kind of like we ignore that they exist kind of thing from Blizzard? I'm surprised Blizzard would do that.
Client server. So in client
I don't think that companies should have to provide their source code. Like, they shouldn't have to give out their source code after they stop making the game.
Well, additionally, and this is less common, but it is still possible, there are some places that may... Source code is not necessarily owned all by one specific... This kind of goes into that third-party thing, right? Source code is not necessarily all owned by one specific entity. Some of it is licensed, and some of it can be licensed by individual developers, depending on their agreements with companies. So, there's a lot of complexities here. When is some of them being closed when they grew too big? According to Battle.net, private WoW servers are against the Blizzard terms of use, may lead to various punishments from having your legitimate retail WoW account permanently banned to the possibility of legal action against you. Okay. So it's we're going to allow it, but we have the right to shut it down at any time kind of thing. Kind of like mods for Bethesda games.
But if somebody wants to make a recreation of the game, that's okay, and they shouldn't be shut down. So like that's really my only perspective on this. Like all of the rest of this could be right. Like I could easily see where he's coming from with this. Yeah, sure.
It's a noble objective. I don't
Wayfinder also
disagree
did it
with
really
what
well. Yeah.
Stop
We had an old patch
Killing
number.
Games is
Exactly.
trying
Yeah.
to
So
do.
that, I think that's really like the fact that companies can shut down a private server after the company is no longer providing the game. I think that's really the problem.
It is scummy.
That's actually the issue, because like if you have a game that's like for example, The Crew, this is like one of the recent contemporary examples. People were able to remake the game and continue providing support for the game even after the developers stopped providing support for the game. And I think that's a good thing. That's a great thing. You know, even if you look at it from as abstract of a perspective as art preservation, it's art preservation. 100% this is good. He talks about that. It's violating the law because of licensing. Oh yeah, no, but I disagree with the law. No, I don't think that the licensing and the copyright laws that we have are in the best interest of the consumer. I think that they give too much control and too much power to the individual companies. Like, for example, I don't think that Nintendo should be able to shut down a tournament for Smash Brothers Melee. I don't think they should be able to do that. You purchased the game, you bought the game, you spent your money on the game. You should have the autonomy to decide what you do with that game and how you present that game and what you, like, for example, like you don't have to pay a, you know, like you don't have to ask, I don't know, like whoever makes a hammer or a chainsaw, if you need to, like, you know, you have to pay them a dividend. You don't have to pay them commission if you build a house and you sell the house. So after you sell something to a person, I think that person should have pretty much complete autonomy to do what they want with it, unless that it's creating a market replacement for the product in the market at that time.
Yeah, it's like it's not competing anymore. You're not pulling people away from the official game, like you could argue that, well, private servers are potentially doing. If the game's dead, it's dead. It's like the developers aren't making money for it. You know, publishers aren't making money for it. So this doesn't really hurt them at all. And if anything, it just helps continue that legacy and might, you know, if it grows to some large amount, it might provide an incentive for publishers to create a sequel to that game that may have fallen, you know, had a bit of a dip, but now because of these private servers taking off, there's more interest in the franchise again. So yeah, I don't think I don't see why that should be stopped at all.
Right? For example, a private server for WoW while WoW is still active, for example.
Yep.
So yeah, that's what I think. You buy something, you own it. And you also own the autonomy of how you want to use it. I don't see how, like, there's any benefit to the population that's not the case. You're not even a developer? No, I'm not. That's the point, right? But like no, I'm not. That you're exactly right. I'm a consumer. I gave them my money. And I want to be able to do what I want with what I bought with my money.
I agree.
Period. It's that simple.
Models. There's a server and there's a client, and all of the math, all of the game, everything happens on the server.
Yep, it's all happening on the server. It's replicated to the clients, and you have to develop a completely different game. It's like a conference call between. Yeah, we're all on the bottom here. Just wait. Just maybe like Ross will upload a reaction to this, and he'll put himself right in between us. But either way, yeah, it's like a lot of most multiplayer games work that all this shit happens on the server. It's replicated to the client, right? To keep performance of the client at maximum as possible, right? If the player's computer has to do a whole bunch of shit to render, I don't know, to calculate some bullshit that then has to get sent to the server. Now you're increasing packet size to the server, increasing the amount of shit being done on the player's computer, and you're opening it up for that manipulation of packets, right? For cheating. If the player is the one creating those packets of data and sending it to the server, and there's no verification, or, verification, of course, also takes time. So it's better just to do it on the secure server and send it out to clients of what's going on, right? So keep that in mind that when you merge that and you're trying to put all that into one game, there's a lot of security concerns, and there's also going to be a lot of overhead of how the game runs. That's why running a dedicated server and on a separate computer for Minecraft, let's say, and then having your friends join that is going to give everyone better performance than you hosting the server on your PC, running the game on your PC, and then sending that out to other people, right? For the most part, depending on your PC, it's just going to cause a little bit of extra hiccup or latency issues, things like that. I mean, there's so many problems with doing this, but just know that it is not as simple as we're done supporting the game, so now here's the code and everything's hunky-dory. There's a lot of systems here to go with. And it's one of the reasons why Steam is so great for multiplayer games, right? Is because you can connect Steamworks with your game, and they can handle a lot of like the handshake, the user authentication, and they have security already in place for that. So you can kind of just connect up your own game servers to Steamworks API, and then players connecting through Steam can kind of just connect in and have their ID and sync it with Steam for achievements, for clouds, whatever, right?
The client just displays it. And the reason we want to do it that way is so that you can't teleport around and do a billion damage. You don't trust the client.
Exactly.
The server. The client just displays what it's told, right? So if we want...
New World did the opposite. Remember
That's
that?
true, they did, yeah. That was a big controversy, I remember that.
Wanted to re-architect this, we'd have to take all of that server logic, push it back out into the client, and somehow make that playable in a multiplayer-only video game. That doesn't make sense to me. So this isn't going to work.
Well, I think a lot of people have done that before. A lot of people have recreated servers of games. And I think the reason why they're not happening as often is actually because they would get shut down. I feel like we probably would already have a playable version of Bloodborne on PC right now with 60 FPS. We would probably have one at this very moment if Sony couldn't shut it down.
All games.
Slightly different situation.
All games. And it's really easy to say like, oh, you know, that'll get worked out down the line. But we're dealing with government here. If we're going to be putting up these types of ideas specifically in front of government, we need to be calling out the right issues. Especially,
I think this has always been, it seems like, Thor's problem with this whole topic is that he doesn't agree with the way that it's stated inside of the initiative. But what he said originally, I think, is true, is that it is simply an initiative.
Yes.
And the initiative begins
agreed.
a conversation that is more technical about what the actual law should be. So I don't agree with the language in the initiative, absolutely. But I agree that it's a problem that should be solved.
100%. Yeah, and having that discussion is important, and then we can have any lawyers join in from the EU who might be interested in this topic, or legislators interested in this. You know, it's a slow process. It's not like this, it's not like Ross, the creator of this, is a legal and legislative mastermind who is, right? But having that conversation is important. There was something else that he said before this, and I forget. I want to go back, though. Either way, it's just an initiative. You know, I agree that it's kind of vaguely worded and needs to have very, very specific cases laid out here. And if this video doesn't cover it, or the website doesn't cover it, those will be some of the situations that I lay out to Ross and ask his opinion on how it should be done. And I'm hoping that we can agree that maybe there's just some things we don't know yet. Like, we need to think about how we would solve each of these cases. Or if it's possible at all from a larger standpoint. So, you know, so far the video's fine.
If you don't have precedence. Because now you're going to be setting precedent on something that doesn't make any sense with people that may not understand the nuance of our industry, all in the name of saving games. I can't agree with that. So let's go into why this is happening, right? So why did this start in the first place? What is the specific cases they've called out that are egregious? And they have one. It's The Crew. So action on The Crew. The video game The Crew, published by Ubisoft, was recently destroyed for all players and had a player base of at least 12 million people.
Not at the time of it dying. I get it. Like, I get people not wanting The Crew to die, the people who love the game. But I can't believe that at the time of it dying that there were enough people that still cared and want to play the game to warrant all of this happening, right? It's not that there's, if it doesn't work for The Crew, then it can't work for other games. It's just, you know, we need to be accurate here. And I don't think saying a player base of at least 12 million is accurate when there were certainly not 12 million people still playing the game when The Crew shut down. Otherwise, they wouldn't shut down The Crew.
Due to the game's
I doubt
size
there
and
were 12
France's
million
strong
people playing
consumer
all the time.
protection laws, this represents one of the best opportunities to hold a publisher accountable for this action. If we're successful in charges being pressed against Ubisoft, this can have a ripple effect on the video games industry to prevent publishers from destroying more games. First off, I don't like the idea in this that it has a player base of 12 million people. That is not how long.
Yeah, I think this is another thing that rubbed him the wrong way, is that I think that he didn't like the language that was used in the post about it, and he thought the language was problematic for, I think, a couple of different reasons. Yeah, he didn't, which is like, it's different, right? I mean, it's different.
Games work. There is a large number of people that buy the game, and that player base slowly dwindles off until nobody is playing it anymore.
Yeah.
Sure.
If there's any costs associated with keeping the game online, which this was an online video game, then eventually it costs more to keep it online than it does to...
There are a lot of costs. There are a lot of costs. You'd be surprised how much servers cost to run. I mean, I know that, for instance, well, this is not, the Twitch is actually a bad one, but for a lot of games, they can cost 10,000 to 100,000 to keep servers online per month. I mean, they're expensive. I mean, smaller games, you're looking at maybe a couple thousand to 5,000, maximum 10,000. But for some of the more popular games, to keep large servers online, you're looking at a lot of money. I remember that being a point of contention that I had with the original video that I watched too, many, many months ago, which was, okay, you have like 200 people still playing the crew at the time of it dying, and it probably costs, I don't know, maybe $1,000 to $2,000 to keep one of these servers online full time. So it's like, even if we accepted that all this was okay, get out of here, NVIDIA, that all this was okay, that it was great, like we have these laws in place, Ubisoft publishes the code, do you think that a couple hundred people who still play the crew want to raise that much money monthly just to keep playing the game? I mean, it's almost like they're paying a subscription fee now to play the game that they were playing before for free. And I feel like there would at least be a few players, at least a few of them, that'd be like, you know what, it's just not worth it. Like, if it was free, it would be great, but if none of us can front up this much money for each month to pay for a server being online, what's the point? You know, what's the point? So I'm not saying that it's not worth it, but just keep in mind that some of these servers will cost money to maintain, just like all private servers cost that money. So it has to be made in some way, and if there isn't some whale willing to front that money and keep it up every month, you know, you're kind of out of luck. And then on top of that, you have to hope that the person managing the server is actually good at maintaining the server, you know, and doesn't just inject it with some bad shit, or is really bad at moderating and just bans people for no reason, and then you're out of money, and it's like, oh, it's just like there's so many problems. I get it, these are not new problems, these are problems that all private servers have, right? But I think that a game like The Crew is just a really bad poster child, if you ask me. This is not the game to be putting on the burner. I get that you want to target Ubisoft, right? Because Ubisoft, big, they are relatively anti-consumer. I agree. I'm in the same boat, have the same feelings. But I feel like there's better games that you could target that have gone through this. I just don't know if that many people care about The Crew enough. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Should have been Asmongold furrowing his brow, widening his eyes. Dude, Asmon's brow is just, they're legendary. I do the same thing sometimes too.
Right. So the cost outweighs the amount of income for it.
Right. And he's totally right about this. And I think everybody that's involved in this conversation would agree that we should not hold companies liable to continue providing service to a game when the game is no longer financially viable, because this would effectively kill every single live service game instantaneously.
Because you'd say, okay, we need to raise $1 million, which is a tiny amount to make a multiplayer game, but we need to raise $1 million to make a multiplayer game. Also, we need to continue to have funding to keep it online for an unforeseeable amount of time, including when new operating systems come out and new drivers come out that may fuck with it. Like, there are a lot of games, even games that I've worked on, that have had issues. Just, they won't really run on modern systems because of older versions of engines and lack of support on redistributables, middleware, shit like that. it's just, I don't think it's possible to enable this for every single game. I don't think Stop Killing Games wants to have every single multiplayer game part of this initiative. I've heard that there are some outliers, right, that are not going to be part of the laws that they intend to push forward, but still, this just muddies the water, right? It's all very specific cases that need to be handled, and I agree with the initiative, but I need to see like specifics here, and nobody's talking about specifics yet.
And they would never be able to be made again. Like nobody, like you can't do that. Yeah, it's simple. There's no way.
There are bad business practices that can occur in there. There are companies that will sell a online-only game as a single-player experience and kind of just put it into the TOS and hide it. But not all companies do that. When they do, we should be calling out.
And also, like an example of this, I think probably the best parallel that we've had recently is Wayfinder. So Wayfinder was an MMO that then the publisher dropped. I forgot the name of the studio that's making it. But the publisher dropped the studio that was making it. The game really wasn't performing very well. And then the developers of the game came back and re-released it as a single.
I know somebody who worked on Airship. I'm not going to say who or what their position was. But he and I talked in private a bit. And yeah. Yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't great what happened behind the doors. I was like, where have I heard that before? And then I see in chat up here, I see Airship and Digital Extremes. I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember talking to someone about that.
Single player game with multiplayer features, basically, right? And they totally changed everything about it. Airship, yes. Digital Extremes. I think Digital Extremes was the publisher, and it was like Airship, something like that.
That specific company, not all companies. So let's take a look at this and find out more about the crew itself. If we pull up their Wikipedia, we can see that the crew was actually created in 2014, which, much to the hatred of all of us oldies on the internet, was 10 years ago. Oh. So this was an online-only racing video game developed by Ubisoft Ivory Tower and Ubisoft Reflections and published by Ubisoft. So all Ubisoft, right? With that in mind, it said it was a scaled-down recreation of the contiguous United States and included both role-playing and large-scale multiplayer elements. So it had a massive multiplayer component to it. It is an online-only service-based game, and they shut it down 10 years later. On March 31st, 2024, Ubisoft shut down the game's servers, rendering...
And that's the thing, is like 10 years for a live service game, and then I think at the time we were looking at the original video, there were only like 130 people still playing it, which is no small amount. I don't want to shit on those 130 people who were still enjoying it, but consider the cost of maintaining servers like that. I'm not saying that Ubisoft can't afford it. I'm not going to say that. They can afford it. But not all developers can. And if in cases where developers go out of business, you know, I haven't seen really what is supposed to happen to their games in that case. You know, I don't know, it's just there's so many finer points to this initiative that need to be talked about that I don't feel are being talked about yet. But we'll see.
The game unplayable, which is normal for live service games. The only thing that I can see in here that could be a problem is if they post it as not an online-only experience. But everything that I found online shows that the game was always marketed as online only. If you're going...
I don't think that specific types of marketing should remove expectations from a customer for certain degrees of ownership. So I see what he's saying, but I don't like the...
But what customer is expecting to play the crew forever? Like, what customer is hoping to log into the crew and continue playing it year after year after year? I mean, I understand that there are much older games that are still playable, but it's just, there's also a lot of older games that are not playable anymore. There's a lot of them. And you don't know them because they kind of just fade out of existence in memory. So, I don't know.
The idea that because they say it's online only, that means that they can just, for whatever reason, take away access and you're not able to access what you pay for. I think that when you take a person's money for something, you have to...
They're unplayable due to OS limitations. Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, there's a lot of games that... I mean, that's what GOG has been trying to do, right? Is to make sure that these older games are still playable in modern systems. Or, you know, with things like DOSBox, right? So, I don't know. It's like... I get the initiative. I get the desire, but... I don't know. Good idea, poor wording. Yeah, and it's like probably the crew had a something you sign. What's it? The what's it called? The agreement that you sign with the company when you buy a game. EULA, thank you. You sign that and you understand that they can take that off at any time. And I'm not saying that it's okay, but it's like, well, again, is the crew really the best poster child for this initiative? I don't think so. Ideas to modify the EULA, I guess. Depending on how strict the laws are, though, I think that it's just going to make developing multiplayer games more expensive. And I strongly believe that cost will be pushed down to consumers in some way or another, either through initial cost of the game or through microtransactions, whatever. If it's more expensive to make, they need to make more money back from it. And if the way they make more money back from it is by either selling more copies or selling it at a higher price or making more money from the live service component. Or just don't make those type of games or find another finesse. Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be loopholes. There's going to be people that just ignore it and stop making multiplayer games now. I don't think this is actually better for players depending on the wording of the laws and the how wide of a net they throw, how much they encompass. I actually think there could be negative effects for players as a whole as opposed to the positives. I'm not sure that the 12 million players that have owned the crew throughout its existence and the 130 players that were playing it by the time that I last checked the servers when we first watched this First Stop Killing Games video, I'm just not sure that many people would come back to play the crew knowing that there was a private server. And how many of those people would still be there after like a week? I don't know. I mean, it's a dangerous first step where government is putting shoes into game development. How games are supposed to be made? It's a fair question. That is. I mean, I wouldn't mind them taking a stab at all the bullshit gambling and microtransactions and loot boxes, all the shit marketed towards kids. Monetization design is a fucking evil blight on our industry. And that I believe needs to be curtailed by law.
To incur certain degrees of accountability, and one of those degrees of accountability is that person will be able to use what they've purchased in an ongoing way. And I also think, again, that's not even really a problem. Let me just go all the way back. All of this stuff is not really as relevant to me. I don't care about any of this. The only thing that I really care about is that the companies that are the companies that are going and they're selling these games, after they stop selling and providing a service for the game, somebody else can do it instead. I don't think that a company, whenever they are not providing that game, can shut down somebody else for providing the game. That is the only opinion that I really have about this. Everything else is up for debate. Yeah, sure, maybe this is true. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. But you accept these terms in the TOS? I don't care about the TOS. The TOS doesn't...
But here's the problem. It's still is... There's an issue with this third party. I bet... I can't prove right now, but I would bet that the crew uses some third-party technologies that they licensed that they cannot redistribute, that they are not legally allowed to redistribute. I mean, we could check, like, the crew credits or something. Maybe that's on YouTube. The crew credits. No, not cheats. Thank God, 37 minutes. Thankfully, we're not watching all of it. There's gonna have to be something in here about some of the, like, third-party... They usually have it. Havoc. Autodesk. Some of this stuff is okay because it's for development. We're looking for anything that might be related to the... I mean, speed... Yeah, but the thing is, it would have to be do with the server, right? Because clients, that wouldn't have an issue, but if it's part of the server, there might be an issue. I'm also wondering, it's possible that some of these these vehicle licenses would have a problem with. I've worked on a game where we had to get licenses for the game with trains, and there were a lot of licensing problems that were very strict and fucked with the game design in so many stupid ways. I was so pissed at both the licensors and publisher at those agreements. They were terrible. It's addressed in the video? Okay. I just want to see if there's anything specifically that's part of... oh my god, Jesus Christ. They have like every single car. That makes sense, to be honest. I don't see anything here. I don't see anything related to specific server technologies that they might have licensed. It's possible that it isn't in here, but I don't see anything in here. If you think just basic shit, Steam API servers. Yeah, I mean, you're right. If it connects through Steam, you would have to have a replacement for Steamworks in the game, because otherwise, you have to connect up an app ID for it, and that is on the developer side. So if you have Steamworks integration in your game and you need to release your game to the public, the server to the public, you need to create a replacement for Steamworks so that players can have their own handshake and authentication and security servers. That's true.
Important to me. And the reason why I don't think that it's important is because everybody knows that no one really reads the TOS. I would argue that 99.9% of people do not read TOS, and I think the TOS is created in a way that makes it hard to read, right? It's using legal language, and a person can't read legal language.
What has to use legal language?
And also, like, a TOS should not overrule a customer's rights. So you shouldn't be able to just say, like, oh yeah, well, because the TOS says this, we can do this.
But you're not, for whatever it's worth, and this is a separate discussion, you're not buying a copy of the game, though. You're buying a license to the game, that which Ubisoft can revoke at any time, in this case. Now, that's a whole separate discussion. We can argue about the ethics and fairness of that, but just knowing whenever you sign up to create a Uplay account or whatever they required for this, and you buy the game, you're buying a license to the game, and that can be revoked at any time from Ubisoft. Basically, the petition is the death of third party. Yes. Or a dramatic overhaul of how third party things are licensed, which would be a very unique precedent in the industry, right? Because there's no other case like this where you license something for your own use and then players can just go and use that too. Because that's like basically, oh, if I buy one license for this software, now anybody who purchases my software can get this license. So like you're distributing it to potentially, in this case, 12 million users for the cost of one.
There still are things that companies should not really...
Or you have to force the players to buy the license, which is, in many cases, tens of thousands of dollars, right?
Able to do. And also, this isn't really the TOS in the circumstance that I'm talking about. It's copyright law. And I'm saying that, like, for a lot of things, for the purpose of art preservation...
It is. He's right.
If the content is not being provided by the company, I think that it should be possible to provide it with a third party. The terms of service are all inside of the game that you're playing. Terms of service isn't enforceable by law? Yeah, the terms of service is not the law.
But just know that releasing server source code is dangerous for a company too. There might be a lot of proprietary solutions and technology in that server source code that if you release it, it is an issue. Like you're just giving away essentially secrets to competitors of how you solve certain things with maybe, I don't know, your server architecture that you've paid individuals perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars over many years to develop for you and your company, for in this case Ubisoft. And I'm not going to go out on the limb to defend Ubisoft, really. I'm not going to wage my digits on it, but just think of it this way. You pay 10 extremely competent software engineers over the course of 5 years. These are people that probably cost, I don't know, $120,000 a year So you're spending, let's say, 1.2 million a year, plus a little overhead, 1.5 over the course of 5 years. So you're spending, $7.5 million to create good server architecture that now at the end of this game, you're just going to release. And now all your competitors have access to that server architecture. Yeah, I'm not so sure that I think that's a great idea. Would it be say an intense troll makes it MMO worse for everyone also entitled to keep playing. Somebody should still hold a moderator position at the very least. But it's like, that's additional money. So they create business adventure. Yeah, it's like, look, I love the idea of the initiative. And I'm having the conversation. I'm not attacking the initiative. I'm not attacking Ross. I'm just saying that I want to have this conversation. I want to solve this problem too. But every red flag that I get into, I can't find a way past. And I'm not an expert on like the legality of this, or I've never been a server architect, so these are just kind of like the high level red flags that I see as a game developer.
That's
and
different.
They're bad.
There's no more service. There's no more terms of service. That's a much better argument than what I made. Yeah, the TOS doesn't apply. You're not dealing with them anymore. Yeah, good point.
Going to be buying an online only game, that means it can only run when it's online. And if the servers need to shut down...
Someone said contracts shouldn't exist. Of course contracts should exist. But contracts should exist in a way that's beneficial. And some types of contracts already are not allowed to exist. And I'm saying this isn't even part of that at all. It's completely separate.
Contracts are meant to protect both parties.
Is gone. It's not even with the
not
company
just
anymore.
one.
In the future, far in the future, it makes sense to me for the access to that game to be cut if it's online only. If it's a single player experience that has online only functionality specifically just to shut down the game in the future, and the online only doesn't actually add any gameplay functionality, I'd agree with you. That's
like what's a good example of a single player game that has like some microtransaction shop. Let's even say this. Fallout 76, because that's just the one that came to mind. You could play it single player. Warframe's another example. You could play it single player. They could take away the shop. They could take away the multiplayer aspect, like the connection. It would suck. But you could still play it. And I do agree that to some extent that would be an okay scenario. You just can't connect online. You host your own world or something. I mean, Warframe is an even better example than Fallout 76 because Warframe is peer-to-peer connection, right? A player is hosting that game, and you connect to that host. You're not connecting to a server like in Fallout 76. Bethesda hosts the servers, right? Warframe is peer-to-peer with a little bit of handshake and security in between, right? So there could be a way that's like, okay, we shut down the main servers, you can still play. Maybe we have a way to connect peer-to-peer, maybe not. And you just play it solo. You can rank up your frames. You can, craft things, whatever. And like when the servers are still up, companies already take responsibility to ban unsavory individuals. But I feel like you're saying a copy of the game is owned by a paying customer. Right now, it's like if you buy a game on Steam, you don't own the game, right? GOG is a good example of when you buy it, you own it, right? And you can distribute it because there's no DRM. But Steam has that DRM, and you don't own the game, you own a license to the game. Those types of games, they only lost the multiplayer element. This petition is pointless. Yes, those games just function. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know which one this is targeting, and it's like you have to go case by case.
Shitty business practice, but that's really rare. And in the specific cases where it does happen, we should call out that, not just all games and not all live service games.
I agree.
There's more context to this too.
Okay.
The Crew itself came out in 2014, but it actually had a sequel that came out in 2018, and then it had another sequel that came out in 2023. And if we go to the Crew's SteamDB, which again is not going to be all of the player base for this, it's only going to show the ones who were playing it through Steam. It was on multiple platforms. We look at
there might be 3 people that were playing it total.
Here, it did start out with a sizable amount of community, and then it degraded, and it had a major drop-off in 2018,
after
which
the
is the
release of Crew
same
2.
year that it launched a sequel. This is normal. when a sequel comes out, a lot of the player
Yeah.
base, if
The
the sequel
FIFA
doesn't
games.
suck, will move over to it. And then the servers effectively die.
Yeah, and we checked somewhere around, I think it was either here, I think it was start of 2024, this little hump, was when this Stop Killing Games came out, this first video, and that's what I reacted to. They're still selling the game, right? So I should be able to play the game, right? I can agree with that. If they're still selling the game, you should still be able to play the game. And this isn't, accounting for like, I don't know, like a physical copy you buy from like a third party or something like GameStop or Amazon. Somebody selling, a disc or something, right? But I agree with it 100%. If they're still selling the game should still be playable. Like the servers should still be online. Also, hey Shane.
You can't run a live service game on this few players. You
can't.
Exactly. And a company shouldn't be expected to either.
If I bought the game 10 years ago, should I be able to play the game? I feel like there are caveats to that, right? The guy who made the video said it wasn't about crew specifically. He was just using that. I still just think that game, that using the crew as the poster child for this is not a good example, especially when it's like all this drama's going down, right? Pirate Software's talking about it. And there's one player through Steam. I don't know how many people are playing it through Uplay, but there's one player through Steam. And it's just like, you can't afford servers that cost maybe $5,000 to $10,000 each to run every month off of that many people playing it. Like, it's just not tenable. Should have used a more interesting game, like some of the live service that was like turned off, like WildStar. Dude, I miss WildStar. That was a good game. A lot of problems, but a good game.
He's right.
Most of the time,
completely right
especially
about
not if there's anything else that goes into it. And if we go into that anything
and I've
else,
said this before about other games, is like, if you want to see what the future of a game is.
What if the publisher released the server app like Factorio or Minecraft? So the thing with different games is that there are different server architectures, different engines, different middleware being used, different security. So in both Factorio and Minecraft specifically, I think Factorio 2 you can run a dedicated server. These have specific separate servers made. They aren't hosted online. You're allowed to cheat, things like that. Hey, Brian Walker reacting to somebody. Yeah, this is a three-way call here. With something like the crew, you have that integration with Uplay, so all of the authentication and handshaking is done through Uplay. By pushing that to third parties, to people hosting a private server, now they have to create new technology for players to authenticate with each other or to authenticate with a dedicated server that is being hosted by the individual players, right? So, and then additionally, if they have any third-party server code or plugins that they may not be able to legally license to players, they need to tell players, well, okay, we either need to make more money so that we can afford to replace these integrations with our own code, or you need to purchase a license for this software, which is often $10,000+ right? Same can be said for Factorio Minecraft regarding handshaking and cheats. Yeah, but there's still different. It's different with Minecraft and Factorio because you're handshaking peer-to-peer, right? Or with that dedicated server. So they've developed their own technologies for handshaking and preventing some form of cheats. Not all of them, but some of them. And it's not the same for every multiplayer game. Every single one is going to be different, especially the more complex and the more strict that they have put behind it. And manipulate the French consumer protection laws and crew just so happen to be made by a French company. Yeah, I think there is some of that. So many new people, welcome. Hi guys. You should use older MMOs like Ashran's Calls examples. They're hosted servers run by fans using data mined and reverse engineer packet captures. And the thing with these self-hosted like private servers of MMOs, there are still issues with private MMO hosted servers. There's still issues where, and this is not an issue. Let me think about this for a second. This is not an issue that I think developers need to solve. It's just going to be something that players need to be aware of, that if you have 100 people wanting to play on a private server of the crew, for instance, you need to front the money to host that server somewhere, either at somebody's home, either at an official server somewhere around the world, and that's going to cost money. Where do you get that money from? Who pays for it? Now, a game that you were playing for free, you're having to pay maybe $10 to this private server for. Maybe you're okay with that. But now maybe let's say you have a moderator of that server that just goes crazy and just bans you for whatever. It's like these are issues that private servers have had to contend with and will continue to have to contend with, that players just need to keep in mind. There is no perfect solution that's going to get you to play something forever. Maybe a new operating system comes out and it breaks the game, it breaks the server, right? There's a lot of older games that just don't work on Windows 10 or Windows 11. I mean, try getting like Fallout 3, for instance, to run on Windows 11 these days, or Oblivion. Oh boy, not going to be a great experience. You can do it, but in a lot of cases, you're just going to be coming back-to-back crashes, or because of weird driver issues with your GPU, or even your CPU, for instance. I just don't think that it's something that can be reasonably implemented for every single multiplayer game. I think it has to be taken case by case, and because of that, I don't know if there's a sweeping law that you could put into place that would really be... It would either be too strict, or it would be not strict enough to where it doesn't really do anything in the first place. But think about it this way with giving the server binary. You don't... The company owns the code, right? The developers. And we mentioned this a bit previously. I don't know if you were here for the video, but imagine they have to pay 10 extremely competent programmers to work on the server back end over the course of, let's say, like 5 years. And this is costing over $5 million easily to pay 10 competent server engineers over the course of 5 years. Easily $5 million. Now you're giving away these trade secrets, this code of how you handle your servers that you can use on all your live service games to competitors. I mean, I just don't think that would be something that companies would want to do. They can't get the binary in many cases. A lot of them have their own license for stuff they use to run the servers. Yes. Yep. 100%. Are you still between XQC, Minecraft, on the talkative scale? I rate myself somewhere around Sniper Wolf. Oh my god. God damn it, Sniper Wolf. Yeah, that's absolutely true, Sir Maxim. You're 100% correct. There are times where you license something and you are not allowed to distribute that to other people. So you would have to say, okay, we can give you all the binaries except for this third-party, thing that we've licensed. Factorio server is given code for free. Yes, because they made all that code. Or the licenses that they have for any third-party code allows them to distribute that to other people for use in Factorio. But that's not always the case. In many cases, especially the larger the game, like this, like the crew, there's probably some code that either they can't distribute or they don't want to. So, there's a lot of problems with this that I have that I don't think are easy to solve. But I like having the conversation. I think this is a noble goal. I just don't know if it's possible. Uphill Minecraft server, yeah. Just more proof that Minecraft and Factorio are exceptional games and should be played by everybody.
Let's look at the Steam charts of the game. If there's a lot of people playing the game, then it's going to be fine. And if it's a dead game and there's like double-digit number of people playing it, then there's a problem. And the game's going to die.
And we could see that there was license problems.
Yeah.
So on December 14th, 2023, Ubisoft delisted the crew and its expansions from digital platforms, suspended sales of microtransactions, and announced that the game's servers would shut down on March 31st. So they gave them 3 months.
Somebody brought up a good point in chat, and they said that they shouldn't be able to monetize the games because it's still not their IP. I really think I need to agree with you on that. I do. I think that you're right about that. Because if you're doing it for game preservation purposes, then you shouldn't be able to monetize it. So it's happened already? Yeah, but
it's like, if you can't monetize it, then how do you maintain a server? I don't know. Like, I can agree with it, but then at the same time, it's like, how do you actually host servers for some of these very, very large games in a manner that is reasonably priced? It's impossible. I mean, some servers just cost a lot of money. Charity companies should do it out of the goodness of their heart. Look, Ubisoft is such a... It's such a good but also bad example, because of course they could continue to keep the servers online for this game. They could afford to do it. It's Ubisoft. Don't lie to me. But at the same time, The Crew is such a bad example because nobody really... The reason they shut it down is because nobody really wanted to play it.
I
pick
feel
a different
like
game?
that, right? Yeah, 100%. They shouldn't be able to turn a profit. I think that it's okay to ask for donations, right? Like, that's fine. But to monetize it and to sell it, I think that's very problematic.
This, though, especially when players discovered that the game had unutilized programming for an offline mode, I would like to see what that entails. Because if that's true, that holds weight.
Usually I would say, hey, 6 months is probably a better deal. But if they're going to do 3 months, they're going to do 3 months. The only thing that I'd be interested outside of that is if there was a contractual obligation to do more than 3 months and they didn't follow it, if it was in the terms of service or not. Citing upcoming server infrastructure and licensing constraints. What were those licensing constraints?
Yes, yes, actually that is important, because there are a lot of times, if we look at, actually there's a lot of games that this has happened to. I think it happened to Mafia. It happened to some other games too, where they only had a license to use certain technology in their game for like 10 years. And once that license runs up, they either have to renew that license or they have to take the game off of Steam, for instance. And I know that there are other copies of other instances of that happening, so maybe somebody can tell me that. Something like 0.02% of users donate to things. Guy who made Polyhaven give a talk about running a company on donations. I don't know if I would run a company on donations. That doesn't seem great. You buy the game for $60 you expect to play for a long time. That means your whole life. I still play my childhood games without any license. It was a different time. With digital marketplaces comes a different understanding that if you buy a game on Steam, on Uplay, on Origin, whatever the fuck exists now, you do not own the game. You don't own it. And that's a different topic that I can also kind of agree with, that's kind of fucked up, but just know, you don't. Can you say everything you said from the start of the stream? Yeah, let me just restart the whole stream again. Sorry, 1 hour. But like GOG, yeah.
Turns out that all of the cars in the game were licensed from the car companies.
Yes.
And a 10-year running game likely means that they had license to them for 10 years.
Yeah.
And that means that it would likely reopen for negotiation.
Yep.
Now, I understand that's speculation, but
I've got a crazy take on this. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's absolutely ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, but I've been in that situation before. I worked in a game with licenses too, and guess what? They have time frames. I don't know what they are. I just know that they have time frames. And either the company can say, and look, remember again, that it's a matter of negotiation. You can go to these companies again and say, hey, we'd like to renew the license. And they can say no. They can say, okay, well, we want double the money of the first time. They can specify restrictions. It is their content. They can say, oh, well, we liked how you used it here, but not here. So we'll allow you to use it again, but you have to remove it from this part of the game. It's fucked up. It is fucked up, but it exists. It's a real thing.
The entire idea of you need to license a car in order to use it like this, crazy.
I disagree. I don't think that's crazy. I mean, you have the intellectual property for something being used in a game. How's it deal with Gran Turismo 1? I do not know. Every single one is different. Is BS fully BS? What is BS? Like, every single license will be different. So you might be able to get a lifetime license. I know, for instance, when we were getting train licenses, Deutsche Bahn did not allow us to show their trains derailing at all. So you actually had no lose scenario when playing, even though we didn't show derailing, like it was just a fade to black and it said your train derailed. Even that was not allowed because they didn't want people to associate their trains with derailing. And it's like, this is a core part of the game. This is a feature of the game. Nobody thinks that your train's derailed. They drove it too fast. They broke the speed limit. So, the licenses are just so fucking stupid. The license for the 3D car model isn't a real hardware. Well, it's not, but they own the right to the designs. They own the right to the designs of the hardware. Even buildings have IPs, yes. Yes, depending on which city you set your game in, you may not get the rights to show certain buildings. I know that, for instance, a game that I know was made in Barcelona because Barcelona doesn't have any restrictions on showing its buildings in-game. But I think there was Rome, for instance, does. You cannot set your game in Rome without first getting permission from the government to show those buildings in the game. And they may not give it to you. So yeah, even buildings have IPs. It's really weird, but yeah, you can't just have like a game, oh, let's just set this game in this city. And nope, it's still the government's going to contact you and tell you that you need to stop.
This type of a deal many times in the industry, while I've been working.
Same for Japan.
So it's not unlikely. If you're going to have to renegotiate on a game that has...
So I can't make painting... No, but I believe Barcelona is safe to use. I think all their buildings are like... I don't know the word, but let's just say for open source buildings. Let's just call them that for the sake of me not knowing the exact word. You don't need to get permission to use them. I don't know about New York. It's every single city is different, but I just know that if you make a game in cities, public domain, yeah, it's something like that. It's something like that. I don't think that the term New York is protected, but buildings are protected. We can ask ChatGPT. Let's just ask, because maybe it'll tell me. Why am I allowed to make a game showing buildings of Barcelona, but not one of Rome? Is there some sort of copyright protection on buildings? Okay, hold on. I don't know how true this is. Europe could be. Freedom of panorama. That might be it. It might be this freedom of panorama is a legal provision in some countries that allows the photography, filming, and public display of buildings and sculptures permanently located in public places without violating copyright. But I'm not sure. I think I remember panorama being part of it, and I think it's some panorama law. Okay, here's a map here, and green is generally okay. Yellow and red are not okay. Yeah, yep, okay. I remember why. I remember why because there was a game that I know that the developers wanted to place it somewhere in Italy, but they couldn't because of this freedom of panorama law. But that's why they chose Spain instead, because it was allowed. It's something I didn't even know existed. It was a wild understanding that you can't do it, but I don't know. So, you know, the more you know, I guess.
So few players and is not turning a profit anymore, you're probably just going to forego the renegotiation. And if those servers are aging, you're not going to want to recreate that infrastructure. And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money. When you already...
Yeah, there's, just so you know, I don't know how many people know too much about like game dev and stuff, but you can't just make a game multiplayer and you can't just make a game single player. Like, there's very different ways that not only is the game designed differently, like sometimes games are designed around that trade and interaction with players, and if you remove that, you remove a big component of the balance of the game. Another issue is that you have to almost develop two games here, and a lot of the code is not just copy paste between the multiplayer version and the the single player version. So there are cases where I can see this working, and like Pirate Software initially said, a game that is online only but is essentially single player as a service, that you could take the online component out of that and allow players to connect. Like, I think that there was the original Borderlands or something where GameSpy, went down, right? And once GameSpy went down, games couldn't start anymore because they required a GameSpy authentication. So you had to do a GameSpy workaround, or games needed to be updated to remove GameSpy, which is what a lot of them did. So, those are cases where that works, right? You can take that online component out because it didn't really exist in the first place, is what it is. But I bet, good night. Basically, another reason for live service games equals bad. If you drop money on it, to be prepared to lose it. What do you mean by that, Katagoro? Assassin's Creed had one that nobody could play at launch because of online authentic. Yeah, and that's fucked up, Sir Maxim. I agree with that. I don't like that whole online authentication. To have access to a store? Okay, so start me in offline mode like Elden Ring does, right?
You have sequels out in the game.
I don't think that's a good argument that it's developer time and money, because people paid their money to play the game. And I think the developer does need to ensure that the person who paid their money gets the value for their money.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's now going to cost more money to make the game, which Ubisoft can afford, right? But not all companies can, and it increases the cost of making a multiplayer game. So no, the time and money taken to adapt to these desired laws will be a significant factor in the publishing of games going forward, multiplayer games, and what they're priced at and how they monetize. And if they are supposed to be a cheaper game that they earn money throughout, playing the game further, or let's say like mobile games, for instance, that are almost entirely free and monetize some online component, I don't know, it's just there's so many different factors and markets and additional costs that are going to have to be incurred, and I promise you, they will be passed down. It doesn't matter if Ubisoft can afford to do it. Do you know what they'll do? They'll take their $70 games and they'll price it at $80. How long do you plan to stream for? At least like another 7 hours, maybe 6-7 hours. A 2004 Italian law called Codus Urbani states, among other provisions, that to publish pictures of cultural goods, meaning in theory every culture and artistic object in place for commercial purposes, is mandatory to obtain an authorization from the local branch of Ministry of Arts and Culture. Yeah. Why not 100? Yeah, let's just do a 100-hour stream.
So if you can't do something like that without creating a positive upside for the consumer, then maybe a game like that shouldn't really exist.
Well, and that will be that will be a reality too. Is fewer multiplayer games will exist, which I don't think is better for players. I don't know. If there's additional cost and risk, that's going to cut out a certain number of multiplayer games, right? At a certain point, a game is too risky and too expensive to make. Fuck that idea. Go back to something simpler. And I'm not sure if that's what players want. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. I don't know. Make your own cities. Yes.
You see what I'm saying? It just because it takes a lot of time, or it's extra work for the developer. Well, if it's too much work for you to make the game, make it to where people can play the game regularly on a regular basis after it's not being supported anymore. If you can't do that, then maybe the game shouldn't exist.
That is a fair argument, and that's one of the discussions we have to have I think it's an L take, but also a W take. The reason is, this is how Asmon speaks for players here. This is how players think, because they don't understand the complexities of development. And it's not that they're wrong. It's just so you know, it's like, if you want these laws passed, here's what is likely going to happen. Fewer multiplayer games will exist. Multiplayer games that do exist will cost more money to make. And that cost will be pushed down to the consumers. It's not like you pass these laws, multiplayer games get 20% more expensive, and now magically 20% more players have spawned that can purchase your game. No, now you need to make back 20% more of the cost. And so what do? You increase the price of the game, or you double down on monetization within the game. Less companies will want to make games if there are such strict regulatory requirements. Yes. Yes. That will be one of the results. 100%.
It should calculate the cost ahead of time? Yeah, it should be calculated into the cost ahead of time.
Exactly. Well, it will be.
Then don't make the game, yeah.
And you'll pay for it as a player.
Has basically no players left anyway. It makes more sense to just move on. I don't find that to be a problem from the developer perspective, and I understand that people find that to be a problem from the player perspective.
Yeah.
These are two different
And this is only true in the case of a game going end of service. And this is only in a doomsday situation, literally, right? We're only talking about this with end of service games. I'm not talking about this with like ongoing live service games.
Ideologies, and that's okay to have two different ideologies. I just won't agree with it because I understand the burden that puts if we raise that problem in the way that we are right now. If you try to tell me that every studio needs to run their live service game indefinitely or not want to run one at all, then no one's going to run them.
Exactly.
And we're going to miss out
he's right
on
about
adventures like Final Fantasy XIV. And
yes,
even though I don't play anymore, League of Legends or any other live service game.
He's
of
right.
them. You're talking everything, like even phone games, as funny as that is. A lot of people don't realize.
There's no realistic way to have live service games if the company is required to upkeep the game in perpetuity forever.
And it's a little bit hyperbolic to say that they just won't be done at all, but they will become more risky. And by risky, I mean they will cost more, right? That's more risk that you're putting, financial risk. And because of that, publishers will just go for whatever's safer, especially big publishers that need to, kiss the boots and suck the dick of shareholders, okay? They're going to go with what's simpler. And what's simpler is making a game with less risk.
It would be impossible. Not even the biggest studios would ever do it.
That phone games require online-only activity.
Yeah, but nobody's arguing for that.
Pokemon Go. What about stuff like...
But Asmon says nobody's arguing for that, but I haven't seen that anywhere. I haven't seen that mentioned. There's no specifics about that law, so
Monster Hunter.
I don't know.
What about any of these? We'd never get any of them, and that's why I think this needs to not.
They are.
Be
well, I'm not
vague. It needs to be specific about the business practice it's trying to defeat, which is specifically companies that are doing this under the guise of it being a single-player game, but adding online-only functionality that is not necessary and doesn't add any gameplay elements.
I think that's where some of the misunderstanding that Thor has. I don't think that that's what Stop Killing Games is actually targeting. For example, Diablo 4. Yeah. Or probably even Diablo 3, right? Diablo 3 has an auction house too. I don't know if you can play Diablo 3 offline or not. Can you play any of the Diablo games offline? No, you can play Diablo 2 offline. It is rewind back the statement to mention specifically games with hidden offline. Where, though? D1 to 2 are offline? Thank you, question. It's good to know. So Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 are both online. D3 is offline. Wait, D3 is offline on console? No, 3 doesn't have auction. I don't know. I don't play Diablo 3. I play Path of Exile because I'm a good ARPG player. D3 is made server first so that it can't be cracked. It's not what it's actually targeting is the main problem. A law like this will harm every online game. Yes. Yes, it will. It will because there aren't specifics, and I think that the laws are too broad to accurately stop all of the bad behavior. And I think that it will create loopholes that publishers will take advantage of to not... essentially, they're going to find loopholes because the law will have to be vague because you can't make it specific or it will kill a lot of online games. And if you make it vague, there will be loopholes, and publishers will inevitably take advantage of that, in which case the law doesn't do anything except to limit the number of games that get made. Price will be put on the consumer, yep. Yep, yes it will. $70 games? Nope, 80. Somebody already addressed most of this. We will look at the actual website after this, so just so you know, whatever I say now, I have not looked at the website. I will look at the website after this. D3 and D4 are good examples of games that should be preserved as single players. Agree, those are great examples. Pay for a service if you want to keep it alive, right?
That's the problem. So now we're going to go to...
D3 only having offline and console, though, is really funny.
Ross, otherwise known as Accursed Farms, the creator of this initiative, and one of the ones that's pushing it the most online.
Just for people who are new here, my game, Colton Chronicles, 100% offline, no extra DRM. Cheat if you want, have fun. Cheats in-game. Go for it. No game is 70, most games are 100 plus. Dude, games are so expensive nowadays. Also, our game, we're going to try to keep it under $30. And price it fairly throughout each region. No multiplayer week game. Cheat engine, spawn spoon nuts. I'll just make that a like in-game cheat.
I'm going to let him say exactly why he thinks that this will go through.
This is the video we watched originally, I think. I feel like it was this one.
Very easily and why it is important. And then I'm going to tell you why I don't agree with it.
Comes law in the EU? Yeah, it might be. Now, it's not a guarantee.
Also, before we get more of this, I am trying to set up a talk with Ross on stream. So if you guys want to eventually be aware of that, consider following the stream. And I'm going to try to have Ross on maybe this week or next week, depending on his availability, because I'm sure he's a busy man. And we can, ask him some specific questions and just have a casual conversation about where we think this can go, and maybe if I can provide some additional insight from my developer perspective that would help him really nail those things down. Win collab with Asmon, though I don't think Asmon is ever going to care about someone as small as me. Maybe one day.
But I think if we get the signatures, this passes. Why do I say that? Well, it's a few factors. Politicians like easy wins, and this doesn't require them to do much at all. And unless it involves gambling or protecting children, politicians generally don't care about video games. So this isn't of big consequence to
Politicians do care about video games when they can blame it for violence.
them or most of their constituencies.
I'm going to stop it there for a moment. The assertion that politicians just like easy wins, so this legislation will go through, but the politicians don't care about a multi-billion-dollar global industry and that it doesn't matter to their constituencies is incredibly absurd to me. I don't think this is the right direction at all for a movement like this. I think it's incredibly damaging, and it makes our entire industry look bad, both on the player side and the developer side. If we're going to be putting forward anything that may eventually turn into legislation, it should be passing because it's the right thing to do for consumers and developers, and that there's some kind of a middle ground, not just because it's...
Yeah, see, this is what I thought. Because this is what I said originally, is that I feel like this happens a lot when it's especially like people...
I mean, the interesting thing, though, is that there are so many people in Asmon's chat that agree that, I think it's important to note that a lot of gamers disagree with this take that I think is relatively understandable. I don't know. I think that that's a very understandable thing to say, is like, we should be passing it because it's the right thing to do. That's what the goal of good legislation is, not to introduce loopholes or do it because it's easy, but because it's the right thing to do for consumers. And if we're making something like this, which affects me personally because it's the industry that I work in, I want to make sure that we can not only stop bad practices, but make sure that the consumer isn't being negatively affected in the process. While it hits big developers, it'll murder the indie scene of such games. Yes, indies, just so you know, like people I don't know who know how much games cost, I've mentioned before on this stream that our game will need about $3 to $4 million to make, the game that I'm working on, to fund about 15 developers full-time for 2 to 3 years. Okay, it's not a small game, but it's not that large of a game, but it's still $3 to $4 million. And if you start to introduce multiplayer to that, you have to, we would need to add at least probably 5 to 10 more developers, another 1 year of development time, and then we'd have to pay for servers for something. So we're already adding a lot of money on top of it that is already hard to get in the industry. It's not easy to get money as an indie developer. Did a research paper on youth violence video games. Violent crime and youths went down when the SNES came out. Yep. Claims blaming games for crimes are bogus. Yep. 100% agree, Sir Maxim. Just turn this into how things like that are in practice in other parts of the industry. Simple. When you provide a product, you have obligations to service. Unless you go to bankrupt and shut it down for the amount of time after that, no obligations. Yeah. I don't know. Indies will suffer. I do think indies will suffer because it will cost more. I mean, I don't think anybody can deny that it will cost more to develop a game with this in mind than it did before. And because it costs more, you have to get that money somewhere. And that's additional risk. The more money you ask, if I go to a publisher and I say, hey, I will make Cauldron Chronicles, my game, for $100,000. They'd be like, okay, here's the money. I mean, if I can prove that I can make it with $100,000, yeah, 100,000, that's nothing. But when I go to them and I say, hey, look, we're looking for about $1 million a year for the next 3 years, it's like, yeah, we're gonna need a more comprehensive milestone plan for that. But if you do self-hosted servers, you still need to make the servers. You still need to make the server architecture. Making multiplayer architecture is very, very difficult. It's a lot more complex than making a single-player game. Like, that just takes time. So if you need to make a game that can play both single-player, co-op, multiplayer, all these things, it takes time. Indie's quite big. 50 dev or big headcount. Yeah, 50 devs are a lot. That's a lot of developers. Indies make mostly offline games. I don't think they will suffer that much from that. But it's specifically indie developers that are making multiplayer games that will. P2P also costs money nowadays unless you use the Steam one. Yeah, if you use Steamworks, it takes a lot of the time and effort out of connecting and authenticating players. But even then, Steam could take down your game for whatever reason, in which case does this law still apply if you take your game off Steam? Now you need to replace Steamworks with your own authentication. Make a local co-op game and put it on Steam, right? Those make online multiplayer games will suffer more than the big companies that do online games. Yes. It will cut out the lower end of multiplayer games, for sure. It will increase their cost, and because of that, it'll be harder to get a publishing deal for a multiplayer game as an indie studio. And I think that a certain aspect of publishers will say, it's not worth it, and that'll be cut off too. So we will just end up with fewer multiplayer games as a whole if this legislation passes with the way it is worded currently. Things like replication is a pain to troubleshoot. Replication is very difficult. Replication is extremely challenging. It's very prone to bugs. It requires a lot of testing, and testing requires money. Bug fixing requires money. Having somebody to handle your server architecture and security requires money. It all requires money.
On YouTube or people on streams talking about each other's ideas is that it becomes like an argument about like the words that were being used rather than the idea. Because I'll be honest with you guys, I think Thor's right. I think Ross's argumentation, like this slide, is wrong. It doesn't really make sense. It makes it seem silly. Yeah, sure. Yeah, he's right about that. Now, does that mean that Ross is bad and everything he's trying to do is bad? No, it means that maybe this approach is bad. It's a naive approach, sure. Yeah, but I do still think that the effort and the initiative is meaningful. Does that make sense? Right? And I think that's really where a lot of the problem comes in, is because when you disagree about something, a lot of viewers and people take it into, like, they turn it into something where it's like you versus this other person. Or like, really, there's like the third party, which is the thing that's trying to be pushed for. It shouldn't be like Ross versus Pirate Software versus Louis fucking Ross Bennett versus Asmongold. Like, that's not the point, right?
Yes.
It's like how do you do something like this in a way that's effective? And I think that it's turned it's become way too oppositional.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think that's really the point of it. Yeah, the cause is just it's a good cause, and I think that people are arguing about it in a way that's not really productive.
Well, Ross has never come out, as far as I know, and said that he's an expert on this. He just wants to start the conversation, right? He's just taking the initiative to say, okay, I want this. I think other players want this. Help me solve this, right? Users, gamers rise up and sign this petition to make your voices heard, and developers and other people who know more about the industry should come forward and offer their advice or their opinions on how we can get this figured out. I think that's really what this is about, right? In the end, this might actually be beneficial, where games service will be decreased and will be clearly left only to the big AAA, and the trend to turn every game into a service will be less pronounced. But do we want only AAA to be in charge of making multiplayer games? I mean, haven't some of the best multiplayer games been with the indie scene? I don't know. If a server for Soldat on the page, this bill won't hurt Soldat. It could. Sheen. I know that there are specifics mentioning that servers, once they release the binaries, there's no expectation for a game after that to receive support. But, you know, there's a lot of loopholes to that. There's a lot of loopholes to that. Or just let people make games and consumers vote with their money. All these laws are dumb. I mean, that's how it is now. Again, I just don't think The Crew's a good example because it's like, well, it's been 10 years. Barely anybody plays this game anymore, and they made sequels. So, I don't know. You need like a really good poster child for this law and this initiative, and I think The Crew is just one of the worst poster childs you could have.
Does that make sense? Ross is probably right that this is an easy win, though. I don't think that it is. I don't think it's an easy win. I do think, obviously, politicians like easy wins because everybody likes easy wins. Like, I could easily say, like, this is a good argument, but it doesn't really do anything, right?
Yeah, but like the first point of Ross's, or the second point of Ross's slide here, which was that politicians and people, the average public doesn't really care about video games that much. Politicians do like easy wins when it makes them look good, right? They'll blurt out something that seems great, like, oh, we're protecting insert group of people here with this bill. And then you look in the bill and it's like, well, it doesn't really do that. And then you have like $10 million going to some weird shit because your friends needed some money and you didn't want to just send them the money in a normal way. So they like to say things that sound like easy wins.
Like kind of a silly thing to say. Corporations will fight against it. Yeah, I think so. And also, I think that the majority of like, and I don't know how it is in the EU, right? But I know that like here in the US, a lot of issues that young people have don't get taken as seriously because more old people vote. That's the truth. So I think that a lot of problems that like younger people have, like you want to talk about Social Security, like the fucking every politician is going to have like a fucking bona fide stance on that.
Yeah.
But like anything like student loans, completely different topic. So I do think that there is a degree of truth to the way that Ross is presenting it, but I can see how using that degree of truth as an argumentation could make you sound ridiculous. Or it could seem like it's disrespectful. Sure, I could see that. But again, like it's word policing, tone policing. I don't really think that's the point.
It's not.
Easy win, and politicians don't care. This sets us off on a completely wrong foot.
EU law is already unclear on a lot of this practice anyway.
And that's dangerous. If we're going to be setting precedent, which could change the way that law works all the way down the road, then we need to be sending the right message, which this is sending a vague message that doesn't cover the actual problem.
He's right.
I don't think that anybody can send an accurate message because you would have to have the lawmakers figure that out because they're the ones that know everything about it. Like, Ross doesn't know enough about it. Thor doesn't know enough about it. Nobody does. This is like complex, hyper, like fucking specific international European law. Like people go to school 20 years, 30 years to figure this out. This isn't something you figure out in like 3 years.
I'm sure
it's not a win.
Ross has consulted with lawyers already.
And we would be making it easy for them to settle.
I'm not sure though.
It falls in line with other consumer practices. You know how when you buy something, you're generally allowed to keep it?
But you're not buying a game. You're buying a license to the game. Just like when you buy a movie on YouTube, you're allowed to watch it for 24, 48 hours or something. And then you don't own it anymore. You can't watch it until you buy the license again. I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but just these are two separate things. You're buying a license, just like if you pay to go into a theme park for the day, you don't get to go back in there. You're buying a pass to go in there for 24 hours. Lawmakers don't write laws. They spend 6% of the time raising money. They have lobbyists write the laws. Yeah, but I just mean he needs to talk to somebody who kind of knows it a bit more, is what I mean. The motivations on the screen sound super shady. This is the video we watched initially, and I agree with Thor's take on this. This is just it's vague, it's unclear. It's just fluff. It's fluff to make people who don't know any of the problem any deeper get on board with it. And I think that's okay, but also we need to go down the road a bit more. This is high level, we need to go low level now.
Of live service games, in the terms of service for those, you are not buying the game. You're buying a license to the game. And that's the part
That's the problem.
Yes.
In my opinion. I think that's the problem. I think that the whole you're not buying anything, you're just buying a license to use it. I think that this serves no actual material benefit for a consumer. Whether it's Adobe Photoshop, whether it is a video game or anything else, I don't think that just saying, oh, you don't really own the game because we say you only have a license. The reason why they can say you only have a license is because the government enforces that.
By the way, I like how people are saying Thor L. It's like, he's not giving an opinion, he's stating the fact. If you don't like that you're buying a license to the game and not getting a full copy of the game, I don't think attacking pirate software is going to... I promise you it's not going to change a damn thing. You need to be attacking where this matters, and that is a law that we could tackle separately, is one where if you buy a copy of that software or something, you should own it forever or something. I don't know. But either way, that's a whole separate issue. It's not like Thor is giving his opinion on this. I don't know. Chat sometimes, right? Not my chat, though. My chat's nice. It's also important to highlight there's a practical difference compared to a movie license. Games need the license for bans and managing players' anti-cheat. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. That they can revoke that license at any time. You're 100% right, no exception. And that might be one of the biggest reasons that it exists, is to say, hey, if you're cheating, we can tell you that you can't play the game anymore if you get banned by us. And that way you can't sue us over it, that you get to play it now, even though you were, I don't know, duplicating items or typing the N-word in chat all over the place. Well, I view the problem as basically gaming is fucky wucky, let's fix it. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. That's a really good point.
I don't see this as a positive at all. It's an annoying practice. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but consumers don't care.
Should be TOS, not EULA, though.
Yeah, but that's the reason why lawmakers have to make sure there are rules about it.
But terms of, I think that you're right, but also, I don't know. There's clearly a reason that they do it, that you're buying a license, that they can revoke at any time. And it must be done for some legal reason. I don't really see any benefit that the publishers have of revoking your license. They must be doing it because it protects them against lawsuits for some reason. And I would bet that it's because of like cheating and manipulation, shit like that. Something illegal that is done by the players, something that the developers don't want the players to do. Directly affects the gameplay experience for not having that ability? Yeah. Should automakers disable your car if their sensors catch you breaking laws? I don't know. Maybe. Truth is, gaming is much less regulated than other parts in the software industry. The question is, should it be regulated, and if, how? It's not something simple you can decide with a petition. I agree. This really needs... We need to go deeper into detail and... go case by case, you know, and I understand that it's kind of pointless talking about specific cases here, maybe, but I think that specific cases can give us a wide net to see if one encompassing law can catch everything, or if maybe we need multiple laws or multiple clauses that affect each one. Isn't this how you sell software? You buy the right to use software, not the literal bits. How else do you sell software? It's a good point. It's a good point, Push Toy. And nothing so terrible as The Crew. Yeah, The Crew is just a bad poster child for this problem.
It's like going to a theme park and you buy a ticket, you don't own the theme park anymore. Well, I don't really see how that's a parallel at all. Like, of course you don't own the theme park. Obviously you don't own the theme park. You're not buying anything. You
don't own the theme park, but you have a right to go in there for that day. And it's saying that the comparison is that you buy a ticket, you can go in there as much as you want, which of course isn't the case.
Theme park. You're just inside of the theme park.
Really different here.
Somebody
if
said
you don't like the
own
idea
the
of
theme
live service
park.
games
Yeah.
as a whole, I get it. Don't play live service games then. Don't agree to those terms. But if we're under this weird idea that we need to get rid of...
I mean, and Thor's kind of right. Like, if you don't agree with the terms, just don't... You don't have to play the game. he's kind of right. Like, it sucks. It sounds a little bit, I don't know, weird as a gamer to say, but he's kind of right. If you don't agree to the terms, don't agree and don't buy the game. I mean, that's really it. That's how you petition against it.
Of all live service games,
Yeah.
or damage that practice in any way to keep in line with consumer
I don't expect
policies,
anyone to read it,
is in
but
line with consumer policies. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be there in the first place. So this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
The problem is that consumer policies are not in line with consumer benefit. That's the issue. Is that the current consumer policies benefit the developers and they benefit the publishers too much. And I think this goes for all types of intellectual property. I think that people have way too much control over their intellectual property online, and I find it to be very problematic. If you buy something and you release it to the world, other people should be able to look at it, talk about it, and have opinions on it. And the fact that, like, for example, DMCA is so overreaching in the US is insane. Absolutely insane. That's a separate issue. No, it is. You're right. You're absolutely right.
You're not buying the game, you're buying a license to the game. In the niche cases where a studio is trying to sell a game as if you are buying it or purchasing it or using that language specifically, and they give you a live service game instead, I agree that should change. That language should change. You are not purchasing the game. You are not buying the game. You are paying to have a license to a live service
Got a three-way
experience.
call going
I get
on.
that. Is that what this is doing, though? The initiative is not trying to call that out specifically. It's trying to say that all games need to stay in a functionable, playable state, which is not calling out the language that is being used to manipulate the player. Call that out specifically, not this vague bullshit.
And finally, this is a diversion from really
Yeah, so this is the problem. I thought this the first time this came out and like people started talking about it, is that Thor's main concern is like with the language. I don't even think that, I'm not sure if he really has a big problem even with the idea. I think it's just with the language. But the truth is that none of us here can understand the language that like needs to be used. And that's why it's an initiative and not a law.
Well, laws are written in language. Like, the language, yeah, I agree, Lazy Fangs. Like, the language is core to it. Like, we don't know what's being you're saying, well, we don't want our games to go offline. We want to be able to play them forever. Okay. But there are like so many reasons that games can't be played forever. There's so many different problems that could occur, or multiple of these problems at the same time. Like, for instance, Fallout 3 and Oblivion. Those are single player games. There's no online element. And you know what? They're pretty hard to get running on Windows 11. They're pretty fucking hard. A lot of people can't run them at all. Because it's just, the engine is so old, and it just does, it's not compatible anymore. Even under compatibility mode, it just sometimes for some people does not work. That's just the reality. Kid that played a bunch of MMOs, you learn very quickly that the game isn't forever. Yeah, it's like, you can't have a vague law like this. It's just, it's too vague and too encompassing that it's going to make development hell, which is, it's already hell. It's not like games are easy to make. And if you keep it vague like this and you just target all multiplayer games, I don't know what to do. I think what people mean, it should be played indefinitely as it was on release, not that you need to keep updating it. But the thing is, even then, that is sometimes impossible. Just like a game doesn't work on modern hardware all the time, same with servers. Sometimes servers require other software, other redistributables that aren't even sometimes possible to install on newer systems. Like that middleware that existed for Windows 7 or Windows 8 is not compatible necessarily with Windows 11, even if you turn on compatibility mode. But the thing is, no exception is that this initiative, I believe it has said that they would not require developers to, as long as when they release those binaries, when the game goes offline, that they are not obligated to keep updating those binaries for players. That players would be, especially expected, to keep that up to date if they want to continue playing the game. I just think that that's also going to then add another hurdle for players to get these games working on their own, and I don't think it's going to happen all the time. I don't think some games are going to be popular enough to warrant that free development time to make private servers and keep them up to date. Gave this example in another stream watching this. Prototype 1 and 2 are made by a team called Radical Entertainment. The game was published through Activision, and Activision basically shut down Radical Entertainment, and that game has no devs. It works only on single-core CPUs. Wonderful. Yeah, CPU problem. I know that Two Worlds 2, you need to force it to use maximum of 4 cores on your CPU, otherwise it stutters like hell. Yeah. Disagree with releasing server binaries. A bunch of scam servers and abuse. Also should be up to dev to release source code. You're right. There would be security concerns with private servers. There are already security concerns with private servers. This would just exacerbate the problem, especially for games that might have some anti-cheat that goes a bit deep into players' computers, right? So I don't know, this whole releasing server binaries thing, it's just, yeah, to me, I have a problem with it too on so many levels. There are legal concerns with it primarily. If it could work without problems, sure, I'd love. In a perfect world, it would be great if players could just download a dedicated server for any multiplayer game that they have in their library, run it, and you can play it forever. I would love that in an ideal world. But games sometimes work in a very short window of development, and if you can't support the game financially anymore, you can't update that. People say starting private servers, they will still lose their years of progress that was saved on the servers. That's true in a lot of cases too. Or you may join it and the moderator, the owner of that server, is a complete asstard and bans you for, I don't know, some political opinion that you share in the chat. And now you're fucked. Now you can't play that game. So it's you're just like, do you really, really want this, guys? Do you really, really want this?
You're going into law, you need to word it perfectly. Yeah, but it's an initiative. It's not, by definition, it's not meant to be worded perfectly. Like that's not what an initiative is made to do.
Serious topics that politicians would prefer not to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
That's really gross to me as well. The idea that this is just a diversion from serious topics and they can get an easy win in and we can just push it through and there won't be a lot of pushback on it and they're not going to have to think about it too hard. That's crazy dangerous, dude.
Oh, we can just divert the topic away from talking about, gambling aimed at kids and loot boxes that are scummy and monetization design that manipulates the psychology of people with addictions. This is a diversion from that, and this will score an easy win. It's like, no, I mean, if I'm going to talk about anything regarding gaming with legislators that I want a law made around, I'd rather they made a law about the serious things, like loot boxes and gambling to kids and addiction farming. Politicians don't do anything, politicians are idiots.
If you're going to be setting precedent, if you're going to be
I don't know about being dangerous, I just don't think it's a very good argument.
Something that you want to start a conversation to eventually become legislation, and these are the reasons for it, not only can I not agree with the initiative, but I can't agree with you. And I think that the tactics that you're using here are really disgusting. So yes, I won't agree with that, and I won't agree with Ross. There's no way around that. I think this is gross. To sum it all up, no, I will not be supporting the initiative Stop Killing Games. You're not going to change my mind on it because I find this language to be incredibly vague and damaging to the rest of our industry. I think that it will be bad for both developers and players down the line in the way that it is currently written. And I think that starting a conversation that doesn't get to the core of the issue is both wasted time and leads to potentially bad outcomes. So
I think that part of it is true. I don't necessarily think that it's a, what do you call it? I don't think it's a gross or disgusting. It's just a bad argument, right? That's the way I see it. I don't see it as a bad thing. But it's like, yeah, if you disagree with like the ways like explaining the video, like that's whatever. It's not really that big of a deal. But to me, like what I care about the most is that if a game comes out and it's live service and they end the live service and you can't play the game anymore, somebody else should be able to make the game and put it out there and people should be able to access it if for no other reason than for the purpose of art preservation.
Okay, a couple things. Because I believe this is probably where Thor received most of his flack with what he was saying here. I agree with a lot of his arguments. I don't agree that Ross should just not be supported at all. I'd rather, like we plan to do, is talk with Ross on stream, hopefully sometime maybe next week, after things have calmed down, and just talk to him. Just be like, this is what I thought. Maybe you have a different way of wording it, because sometimes, you're talking on a video. He's the creator of the petition, so we're going to be talking to him on stream. And, maybe there's a different way he can word it, or we can just talk and push this forward a little bit and help to define it and narrow down the cases that this is going to be the most harmful or the most helpful. I don't really agree with Thor here that you should just write this initiative off because it may not be worded properly. I'd rather try to get the wording handled properly, because I think that Ross has a very noble goal here. I think Thor's real opinion is this shouldn't happen at all. I agree with him. I agree that I think it would be impossible to create a proper law, but I would at least like to try. There's no harm in just talking about it and starting the conversation. We'll see. But I generally agree. I'm in the same camp as there are too many problems with this that I think it's better not to have that law, and to instead try to pressure the industry to change its practices, right? So just pressure publishers that are doing things like this to maybe have more realistic. I don't know. I don't even know. Let me come back to, wording that properly and having it come out of my mouth. What was the second thing that Asmon said? Asmon just doesn't know that much about game dev, and I'm not blaming him, right? It's not like he common Asmon L or anything here, but just that he's primarily a gamer, so he doesn't know a lot of these specific cases that we've talked about on stream here that I also don't think Thor necessarily mentions or goes into detail about, that would add a lot of additional costs and risks to making multiplayer games, or make it impossible for multiplayer games to be released, to have their server binaries released in this way. I think there's too many legal problems with doing that can't be solved very easily or very quickly at all. Ask Ross to react to this reaction view to make a reaction of reaction, exactly. I at least wanted to watch this and look at the website before I talked with Ross, so that I could, maybe get rid of some of my my concerns.
Everything else, I don't really care about that much. I don't really give a shit that much about it. That's the only thing that I really care about.
If we want to talk about this, let's talk about the actual bad business practices. In the case that a studio is making a live service game, and they sell it to you as a product, they say that you are purchasing the game or you are buying the game, when in reality you're actually purchasing or buying a license to that game. I think that we should be fighting about that. That needs to go away.
Yeah, that's
players
fair.
should be well informed at the point of purchase that they are purchasing a license.
You're also not buying a copy of the game. You're buying a copy of the built game. You're not buying a copy of the source code, right? Those are two different things. And so I think players wanting to be able to play their games forever, while you're buying a build of the game, that very likely is not going to run 2 to 3 operating systems down the line. Simple as that. And that's nothing to do, that's not like Microsoft maliciously fucking over your games, and it's not those game developers maliciously fucking over your game, knowing that it's not going to be compatible years down the line. It's just there are different ways that games communicate with the operating system, and different ways that the kind of the shell of your operating system operates that may not be compatible, and your game just might crash on startup. And sometimes, as we've seen pretty recently, I think there was a case of a developer taking their game off Steam because they lost the source code and they can't update the game anymore. And that's really unfortunate, but sometimes it happens. What you drinking? Pepsi pineapple. Imagine you sell cakes, best in town, but owner decides to close down. Should they be forced to release the recipe? Servers are similar, but also cost a shit ton more than some cake recipe. Yeah, servers cost a lot, and there's a lot of money pumped into the creation of server architecture. There's a lot of it, and a lot of it that they might be using in newer games, so they still own the rights, and they don't want players to manipulate loopholes that might exist in their server architecture to cheat, right? I mean, that's a very, very big concern. Is if you release the source code, people might find ways to find vulnerabilities in the source code and then use that to cheat in your games.
buying a game. And the reason that we have those licenses in the case of client-server interactions, like we had before, we're talking about client-server games, is so that they can ban you when you cheat at them. They revoke your license. That's why they revoke your license.
Yeah.
To protect the gameplay of every other player that you're impacting when you cheat at these games. That needs to exist, but it needs to be better informed to the player at time of purchase. So I agree on that.
I can agree with
this
that.
doesn't bring that up, though. It just attacks all video games that have online-only components and says that they need to keep being able to be played indefinitely. That doesn't make any sense to me. Aside from that, a lot of people really like live service games as they exist now. So trying to kill off all live service games, as some people have said online, doesn't make any sense either. Live service games are a great way to get away from the real world. They're about social interaction between players. Some people get married in them. Some people met their spouse in them and then got married in them.
I think this is, again, a very good argument of why it's important that people can keep making the games and putting them out there after they get shut down. That's my whole point. Absolutely. Yes. That's the reason why.
When it's possible.
Really cool
which
thing
isn't
for
always.
the time in which you're having that social experience. And to destroy that just because you don't like them is very weird. I don't think that makes a lot of sense to me. I also don't think it makes sense the way that Ross is posing this is why it's going to pass. I think that's incredible.
He's right about this. That Ross's argumentation for why it can pass is bad.
Yeah.
Incredibly inflammatory and could lead to a lot of damage to both what he's trying to stop and to games as a whole. To say that the government just doesn't care and this is an easy win and we're going to get it through is disingenuous.
I think he needs to make a new video.
Multi-billion-dollar global industry. To think that the government isn't going to be meticulously looking through this and looking for flaws and holes is absurd. So I think that it's not really that crazy to say the government hasn't really kept up with technology very well. Like, you can look at the way AI is approached or social media. Like, I feel like the government doesn't, it's not that they don't even really care. It's that I don't think that they possess, like, the tech-savvy people that work there at high positions to make decisions that are thoughtful. EU is very progressive with tech, and I find it disgusting.
It could be different in the EU.
Mad about that, fine. Be angry about it. I'm not going to change my stance on that because I can't agree with this, both as a dev and a player. I see the danger involved, I see the vagueness in the language, and it doesn't make sense to me. If we want to fight for better conditions for players, then fight the actual problem. Don't make new ones.
Yeah, I think that really what needs to happen is that if you make a game, you put the game out, you stop making the game, people should be able to put the game out there for free. That's what I think. That's my perspective. I'll go ahead and I'll link you guys the video.
That's the
I think Thor
ideal.
brings up some pretty good points with this as well. I don't necessarily think that he's wrong on a lot of the things that he brings up. I think that also the reason why, like, this is one thing that I've done this myself a lot. There's the video right there. I do this a lot myself where, like, I talk in a lot of extremes. And I think that he kind of did that with, like, saying that it was disgusting or, like, gross, which is like...
I think that he got a little angry. Like, it happens, right? You know, especially when me and Pirate Software are probably both very equally passionate about gaming and game dev. And it's easy to get emotional when you're passionate about something. And I think he sees a lot. We both see a lot of the same red flags. And we both kind of just... I'm pretty sure when I reacted to that original video too, that I felt the same way, that I got upset in a similar way because I was like, there's no way. There's too many problems with this. It's too vague and it's all over the place. So maybe there's a newer video or we're going to check out the website after this video. And I want to see if there's more detail about some of these specific problems.
Like, really not that much of an appropriate word, in my opinion, to describe, like, a petition for, like, keeping video games live or something like that, right? And so I think that rubbed people the wrong way, and that's why people had, like, a negative opinion on it. But I think that a lot of the things that he was actually trying to say, some of them made sense. But I also read comments if you want to read it. Yeah, sure. If you discard your attempt to profit at something, let other people keep it alive. Exactly. What about for people that didn't purchase the game initially? Should they have access to a discontinued game? Yeah. Yes, they should, because there's never a
if it's not being sold,
a loss of profit. Yeah, for sure.
At that point, it's shareware, essentially.
Absolutely. I think in general, like, the amount of control that people...
Although, technically speaking, I think it could be abandonware, but abandonware is still could be... The copyright still could be held by the original holder, or it could have been sold to someone else, right? You could sell the IP to another person, to another company. So I'm not sure that you can say that if a game is not available to purchase anymore, that it's now kind of free to share it. Well, no, because they could still own the copyright to the franchise, to the code. I really disagree with Thor and you. It's vague on purpose. That's how these initiatives work on purpose. They're vague because they're just, hey, politicians, there's a problem here, people care about it, figure it out. But the thing is, Laudmo, that somebody needs to figure it out, right? Somebody needs to create the laws. And the laws should be created by informed individuals, or with the help of informed individuals like developers like me and Thor. So we can provide our reasons why we think that this initiative could go wrong and might be bad for the industry and bad for players in some cases. And so I don't know about Thor, but I'm not attacking the initiative. I like the initiative for what it's trying to achieve. I just don't think that it is achievable. So I would like to, we're going to try to talk with Ross, hopefully maybe next week on stream here, and we can, go over some of these cases and some of these issues that developers have with it, and see if there's a way that maybe this can be put into a new video addressing it, or we can go down that process of talking about it. Process for which includes informed individuals once the initiative reaches a threshold. Well, we can already talk about it now, right? Like, if it's an initiative, it's being put online to start that discussion, and that's what we're trying to do here, is have that discussion. I agree that I think Thor's language was a bit too harsh on it. I still want to see the initiative go as far as it can. I just don't think that it's going to get very far, because I don't see how laws can properly encompass all of these situations and have it be beneficial for consumers without putting a massive amount of overhead on developers. And overhead means time, and it means money. And that money gets passed on to consumers with higher costs of games, more microtransactions and bullshit like that, Nothing new though. Consumers are generally okay with less products, less competition, as long as they personally get more rights. It's possible. First impressions are very powerful, and if it's vague, people not dialed into the issue will come into further discussions with BIOS mindset. Lazarla, you are 100% right. I think that the initial video is not well worded. And I can see exactly how it can upset people who know more about game development. And they're like, well, this is not going to work. There's so many red flags and problems with this initiative, just from an initial standpoint, that we need to solve it with very, very specific wording that also protects individuals just making multiplayer games and trying to do what's best for consumers without, adding some bloated budget to the cost of it. So I don't know. I don't mind it, but I don't know. I don't mind it being a discussion starter, but I don't think that it should be vague, right? It may be broad, but being vague and being broad are two different things. Saying, I want to have a discussion about this goal is one thing, but being vague means that we don't understand what the goal necessarily is, especially when there are so many specific use cases for multiplayer games, and which ones are we exactly targeting, and what does this mean if that they should be indefinitely playable by players after the game is not playable anymore. Base level consumers should not start initiatives like this. Perspectives are important. Keeping stuff vague opens up space for big companies with a lot of money for lawyers to push for more lenient outcome for them. And it will probably happen like that, yeah. Because the consumers don't have the money to lobby the same way that the big companies do. I mean, we already saw it with EA saying that, oh, we call them surprise mechanics. Not loot, it's not gambling, it's surprise mechanics. And they bought it. They agreed. They were like, oh yeah, okay, we understand. Complex issue, and there's no correct way to approach it. However, I do think it could have been approached better on both Ross's and Thor's side, yes. But I think that it does matter that it started out as a not very well made video by Ross, and that's what Thor is reacting to. I think a new video needs to be made, and if I can provide any of my assistance to Ross, with some knowledge or some ways that we could potentially target some of these more important use cases, especially for developers, I would love to help in any way that I can. You love surprises? I bet you do.
Can exercise with intellectual property, and companies can exercise with intellectual property, is not in the best interest of a consumer. like, you have to keep in mind that a lot of these laws are written in the benefit of these companies primarily, right? These are the companies that are lobbying. Like, I don't know how it is in the EU. It's probably a little bit different, right? But like in general, yeah, if you buy Super Smash Bros. Melee, Nintendo should not be able to shut you down for making a tournament about it. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a whole separate
Absolutely
thing. That's
fucking
fucked up.
not. You bought the game. You paid for the fucking game. You should be able to do what you want with the game. That's the way I see it. It's the same. Yeah, I just don't know that.
Nintendo being Nintendo.
So yeah, is the idea of the companies to get to give players tools to their own servers when a company wants to kill their own servers? Yeah, I think that's it. And also, like, I think this is a good thing. Like, it would be a good thing if the companies had to actually give the people that are buying the game the ability to continue playing the game.
But that alone is very, very difficult, to give players tools to run their own servers. That alone is a completely specific way to develop a multiplayer game. I'm not saying it can't be done, but there are different cases here. There are different multiplayer games. Not every multiplayer game is built the same way or handled the same way in the server backend. Take a look at the way that, like, what was it? PlanetSide handles shards for its servers. You need to run multiple server instances to handle this, not just one server. So now you need multiple computers that are communicating with each other in this way. That's expensive to maintain. It's not like you just release a tool that you download and boom, it's working, right? And then you don't know how to maintain it. You're not the one that wrote the code. So you either need people to care enough about that game to jump into it, who are knowledgeable, that won't fuck something up, that can run that code and maintain it, or it's just not going to be even worth it to do so. So what, I'm supposed to spend more money making my multiplayer game playable after it dies, but now there may not be enough people to actually run it after it dies, so I just kind of wasted that money? Like, what's the point? Like, not every game should be treated the same in this case. Ultimately, I understand how it may, from a US perspective, it may seem very exploitable, but I also think the EU works differently enough that's not as large of an issue. But the thing is, Laudmo, is that when you make a game for the EU, you need to make it for the US as well. You can't just cut out one of your biggest audiences. So if the EU passes a law for games, the US developers will have to abide by it the same way that the EU developers will. The same way if the US passes a law like that, the EU developers would have to abide by it, because that's one of their biggest markets for these games. So, you know, ultimately I see this as not being an EU initiative as much as I see it being this is going to affect the entire world with game dev and games. And I don't see how these laws are going to work very well. You're saying EU politicians act differently and less lobby-based. Yeah, I agree with that, 100%. For consumer that ignore developer struggles will just end up hurting both pro-consumer practices, fall apart on complex tech. Yeah, I think that... I actually think about this, that stuff like this will not only negatively affect developers, but it will negatively affect players as well. in ways that I don't think players necessarily understand all the time. They weren't going to do two separate versions of a game for two different continents. No, they're not. You already have to do that with languages in some cases, right? Or different, like a Russian-only version, for instance, because, you know, usually the Russian version of your game is much cheaper, so you sell only that version in Russia and not the global version, and that way you can avoid some people taking advantage of cheaper prices. Or it would be vice versa. You wouldn't allow, like, people to buy the Russian version that also has the English language, because then you could buy a much cheaper version of the game and you would lose a lot of money in that case. So a lot of games do have multiple versions for different continents or different regions for regional pricing purposes, or to remove things that aren't considered safe in that country. Like Wolfenstein, Germany version, removes the Nazi flag because it's not allowed in Germany. Are you need to make a different client for Japan and China due to their laws? Yep. Overwatch and loot boxes, they had to disable buying loot boxes in some EU countries. Yes. Been involved in the North Star custom server for Titanfall 2 development, as far as I'm concerned. If all this causes is raw server code, which is unusable in its base state, is released and anti-modding features are disabled, enough would be the best solution, but it would be a workable one. That's if the raw server code, first off, if developers want to release that and show exploitable vulnerabilities to players for other games that are made by that studio, right? If Ubisoft is using similar code for all their multiplayer games and they release it and show vulnerabilities in their multiplayer code, that could affect all of their games negatively. And if they use any third-party software or tools to enable the running of these servers, they can't release those due to licensing problems. So now they're releasing essentially an unplayable game to the players due to this law. I see that recommended bar, Asmon. If you're watching, I approve. Which one? Logan Paul sued me. I saw that. Games should just add monthly subscription again so player count is directly balanced with server load. Yeah, I agree, no exception. I think that inevitably, if this legislation passes in any form, even if it protects consumers in some regards, the cost of it will be passed on to consumers. So if you want this, be willing, because you will, be willing to have to pay more money for your games, for multiplayer games. Simple as that. What code you were saying obscurity is security. This is false. Obscurity is not security. And if this causes devs to have to fix more shit, then that's fine. I'm saying that there's vulnerability in pretty much every code. And releasing source code for multiplayer games is a big security risk. And I think that's just true, like regardless of other things. Decompiling the binary to assembly and reverse engineering is a thing. True. If it was a law, companies would think about these things from day one of development, so it'd be easier workflow. It wouldn't be an easier workflow. It would just be that they would have to think about these things from day one, but that it would cost more to develop. Because you're inevitably having to do more development, and that takes more time and money. It takes more people as well. So yes, you would have to think about it from day one, of course, but yeah, it's not great. It's not great. It would cost more money. You'd have to hire more people. Not server code, which is the whole point. Yeah. Exactly what we did for North Star custom servers. I don't know. I don't think but how many players actually want to play custom servers versus how much do they cost to run? That's the thing. It's like, I don't know, if a game is dead because only 2 people are playing it, some multiplayer game, and you release the source code for it so that players can run it on their own, are people actually taking advantage of that? Now you've spent another, I don't know, let's just say $200,000 working on this aspect of the game that nobody's going to make use of after the game's done. Oh, and then 2, operating system versions later, it doesn't even run anymore. So, what's the point? Private servers only exist only because it got leaked. Yeah, in a lot of cases, yeah.
After they make the game, and will this take more developer time?
Yes,
it absolutely will. But I think when a developer is asking for your money, then isn't that justified? Like, it's not like just as a developer, like they just get to take your money and tell you anything you want.
It might be. But that money, that cost will be passed on to players. And if players are okay with that as a whole, fine. I'm not going to say they are or aren't, or that this shouldn't or shouldn't happen. But just know, if it costs more to develop a game, you need to make more money to recoup the costs of the game. That either means more people being sold the game, or more money being made from each sale of the game, higher price per unit. Or if it's a live service game, more money being made from live service elements like microtransactions. That's just simply a fact. And if you introduce laws that increase the price of game development for these games like 20%, let's say, it's not like 20% more people are magically going to appear and purchase your game. You're going to have to make up that 20% by increasing PPU or making more money from live service. Might be a better middle ground be to change the buy button to a license button for game software that depend on a central online service. I mean, I would agree with that simply because it's more accurate, right? It's just more, it's better at informing players, and I will never disagree with an initiative like that. But I don't know if that is necessarily what this initiative is targeting either. I think players still understand that they're buying a license to the game, but they're upset that when the game dies, they can't play the game anymore and they've lost all of it. So I think like Thor was like arguing one point, but the initiative is targeting maybe that and something else. But it's just so muddled because there isn't really a clear goal and set of laws that the initiative wants to put in action. So we're all just kind of like arguing about what would we do? How would it work? GoFundMe to keep server up? I mean, the takeaway is it's unclear. Yes, it's unclear. And because of that, nobody really knows what to do here. Expectation management. I will never be against informing players more. And I would rather, yes, if you change the buy button on Steam to purchase license, yeah, I'd be okay with that. It's a little silly, but you know what? It helps players understand that they're not buying a copy of the game, they're buying a license to play the game. And yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'm all for it. Titanfall 2 is far from a large community and people use the custom servers a bunch, even now that they fixed official servers. But they still have official servers, right? And are custom servers something is that like a separate thing that you download? Or is it, what is it? Is it a tool that was officially made, right? Because in that case, it was planned development to create that private server that could be downloaded and run. And this is saying every game, regardless of if they have an official way to play it offline or, privately, needs to include a way to have it be played privately. And I think that that's just an unreasonable expectation for a lot of games. Any game on Steam is licensed? Yes, it is. When you die, Steam has the right to remove your account, meaning you don't actually own games on Steam. Nope. And if you get a VAC ban, they can ban your account permanently, and you lose access to all those games. So here's something: do not cheat in games that are connected to Steamworks. Don't do it. You'll get a VAC ban, and you are putting your account at risk.
Just because it's in the terms of service, that's not really fair. I mean, if that was true, then you wouldn't have any reason for consumer protections, because you could just sign all those away with a TOS, but you can't do that because consumer protections matter more than a TOS, or matter more than like how long it takes to do or not do something.
I'd say it's worse than the live service argument. I would agree.
Towards explaining one of these situations, you're not buying the game, you're buying a license to the game, so it will never happen. No, I understand that you're not buying the game and you're buying a license to the game. And that needs to be communicated better to the consumer. I don't think you should be able to do that. Very simple. I don't like this idea that all software now is not owned. I don't think this is in the benefit of the consumer. It's not in the benefit of the consumer that you don't have autonomy over the software that you pay your real money for.
I agree with that, but it may be a necessity, a necessary evil of, if I'm playing an online game and there's a cheater, yeah, I would like them to just be banned from playing the game fully. And it may be that the fact that it's a license makes it legally safe for the developer to do so. And if it wasn't like that, that it maybe wouldn't be possible. I don't know the specifics, but that may be the reason, to prevent them from being sued. There was a period of time when thinking about getting refunds on digital games sounded ridiculous and impossible. It's still stupid that you can't get refunds on that. Like, if they can revoke your license, you should be able to get a refund. Steam aside, is it the same way for itch or GOG? Those are... If the website goes down, can you download the game? No. It's true. As long as it's up, you are buying the game and you can distribute it, you can pirate it, whatever. GOG doesn't really give a shit. But yeah, if the website goes down, if the upload servers go down, you can't download it from GOG anymore. I guess it's just more like this. We're talking about digital content at this point. What do you actually own when you own digital content?
There's no, like, why is this the case?
This is why the blockchain is needed. Shut the fuck up about the blockchain. People. Not you guys. Hopefully you guys aren't big into blockchain. usually gives you a DRM-free installer you can make a backup of. You can, unless you lose that installer. In which case, I guess you have to pirate it, and then they have to, gentleman's honor here, right? That you purchased the game before.
Can just arbitrarily take this away from you. Now, with Thor's example of accessing the server, I think that they should easily be able to prevent you from accessing the server if you're cheating. Like, everybody would agree with that. But this is a different topic. Cheating would be allowed then? No, you just would be banned from the official servers. It's simple. What do you mean?
But
no, of course you couldn't cheat.
There may be an argument legally that players can say, well, I own the game, I can start up the game, and I can't play it because I was banned, so I don't have access to my game anymore. Look, I don't know, I'm just waffling here. I don't know the specifics, but I would bet that there is a legal reason why it has to be a license and handled in this way so that when you're banned, they don't get sued for banning you from this game that you purchased. I don't know, but this is why we need lawyers to look at this, we need legislators to look at this and help determine if this is possible to actually turn into real legislation, or if this is just in an ideal world, this would be great, but we don't live in an ideal world, and this just wouldn't be possible to do.
Absolutely not. No. Yeah, that's the same thing. To normalize the concept, they want to apply this idea for cars now. It's coming close to reality. Yeah. And this is what's happening, is that there's even features for cars that are becoming subscriptions. So I'll give you an example.
That's fucked up. I've seen that.
So this is something that happened. BMW, this was like 2 years ago, right? Heated, what's this here? Let me see if I can find it. Heated subscription dead is on. Yeah. So basically what happened is that BMW tried to do a heated seat subscription. This kind of stuff is massively consumer unfriendly. And even if you buy something and they say, oh, well, you have a subscription to this, it's totally fine. Just when somebody says that, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good idea or it's something that...
I'm going to be honest. I think it'd be really easy to hack that in, right? Like, if it's installed in your car, there's got to be a way to hack that and have your heated seats work. I don't know. But it is stupid. Even if it's legal, it's stupid and it's anti-consumer. It's dumb. You wouldn't download car cheats, right? The Titanfall 2 custom servers are based on a server binary they happen to include in the release game. Ultimately, it's two parts: the modded server binary and a client mod to add a server browser for servers people are hosting. Both sides also include quite a few security fixes, including one remote file access and a remote code execution, which existed in official servers for the longest time. I mean, if they're still supporting that, that sounds like pretty good, but definitely a bit expensive to keep maintaining that. Difference with this physical subscriptions is pure greed, no functional improvement to the product. Yeah. Yeah, at least you could argue that, banning cheaters and being able to prevent them from playing in your game is great. I don't know. There's so many small topics to talk about that it's hard to just say the initiative is good because of this, the initiative is bad because of this. There are too many cases, and I feel like sweeping legislation can't cover all of it. It would be like saying, oh, well, let's raise... Well, I don't know if minimum wage is the greatest example either, but... like this one standard for a group of people isn't the same standard that's going to work for another group of people. Paying $15 an hour minimum wage in back streets of Nebraska is probably pretty damn decent. It's not the greatest, but it's decent. Paying $15 an hour minimum wage to somebody in California, I would use that $15 and I would buy the cheapest ticket anywhere outside of a city. Okay? So, sweeping legislation I don't like because it's generally going to not apply to people in the same way. And it's in this case, I think it's going to hurt developers and gamers alike. A bit expensive for whom? The community of people maintaining custom servers as an open source mod. Yeah, I mean, if they have to run a server, that's going to be costs on them for running the servers, right? And some people might be willing to allow that. And Titanfall 2 servers might be pretty cheap to run from a technical point of view, but I would say that running servers of the crew are not going to be done on a Raspberry Pi. Running servers of PlanetSide 2 not going to be done on Raspberry Pi. So these two cases aren't the same, right? And that's why I can support sweeping legislation. It might work for Titanfall 2, it might work for Minecraft. You can run Minecraft on a Raspberry Pi, you can run a server, but you can't run the crew server on a Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi is only the list. Well, either way, I'm just saying that you can run some servers on really cheap architecture. They don't require a whole bunch of overhead to run, and others require a massive amount of overhead to run and may even take multiple computers in tandem to handle shards of a larger server. Line between multiplayer and MMO can be very blurry. It can. And especially in terms of maintaining server costs. I worked in a company that had worked on a multiplayer game, and it cost them multiple thousands of dollars to upkeep even one version of their server. So it's not cheap. It's not cheap.
It should be allowed. So yeah, I think this is probably the best parallel. And I think this is the conclusion of everything becoming a license and nothing being actual ownership anymore. Keep in mind, everything is going digital and subscription based. Everything is moving away from consumers having ownership. And that's the problem.
Agreed.
And the reason why it's moving away is because when the consumer doesn't have ownership, the consumer doesn't have control. And it removes the ability for the consumer to choose not to buy the new product. It removes the ability for the consumer to change the product in a way that they think is beneficial to themselves. And it basically takes rights away from the consumer and effectively defaults them to the people who make the product because they own the subscription to it. This is in no benefit to any consumer ever. There is like never a single person, I think, that I can't think of a single advantage that only having a license to use Photoshop would be better than having Photoshop. Why would this exist? I can't think of any singular benefit. Cheaper monthly? Yeah, but they choose the price.
They do.
And also, like, they're anchoring the value of that price.
I was just going to say anchoring. Yep, it's anchoring.
Yeah, it's for the consumer. Yeah, exactly. And so
it's like, oh, buy a copy of our software for $5,000 or pay $20 a month. Well, you set the price for both of these things, so you're just anchoring it. Of course, if you tell me I can buy the full product of Photoshop for $1 million, or I can pay $5 a month, and I want it, I'll get the $5 a month version, of course. But you're still setting the price for me using it. I'm not saying that $5 is too much or anything, but still, you know, they're handling the prices. It's not 800% value, Blizzard, okay, if you set the price in the first place. Used to be the server also had to run the whole Titanfall 2 client. Or someone stuck out the entire Vulkan API to make it headless. Still has to run on Windows or Wine, so we only have DLL files. Yeah. I don't know. I did see something in the comments of the YouTube video
So that's the way that I see it.
I liked. I don't know if he'll get to that.
But when it becomes a real issue, wouldn't you agree that all businesses would arrive and solve the problem and revert the damage? It depends on what it is. The more licensing becomes widespread, the more piracy will take hold as well. Jailbreaking my heated seats will be a more common result, in my opinion. Yeah. And you can think about how dangerous that is whenever you're trying to jailbreak the technology inside of a car.
He's right.
So this is the conclusion right here.
He's right.
And things even worse than this are the conclusions of everything being a license. And I find that to be incredibly consumer unfriendly, and it benefits nobody except for the publishers and the developers. It's massively consumer unfriendly. So that's the one thing I don't want to see keep happening. And I think that the companies have way too much control over their IPs. Like, for example, with Smash Brothers tournaments. Because, again, keep in mind, Nintendo doesn't shut down these tournaments. The government shuts down the tournaments because they say Nintendo told them to. But if the government didn't listen to Nintendo, then nothing would happen.
That's an extreme example, though. I think owning your IP is fine. I mean, you don't want somebody else to take the world that you worked hard to make over the course of like 10, 20 years and just make some other game for it, right? So I favor the right to repair. I agree with that. You know, I don't want somebody taking my world and making a game out of it just because I shouldn't own the IP that much. I agree with Asmon to an extent. Maybe he's not meaning it in the way that I'm thinking about it, and he does mean it in a more extreme way, right? That's obviously, I don't think Super Smash Brothers tournaments should be fucking shut down. That's so stupid. Not the first anti-consumer thing that Nintendo has done with its IPs, especially like preventing people from making Pokemon fan games. If they're not licensing it, can you just let some people make some games? Like, really?
So that's the difference. Help the company, not the devs. The devil didn't see a dime. Well, I'm just saying in general, right?
What I saw here was that this the problem was that the Crew was sold at full price even in 2023, and nobody warned buyers that the game will be unplayable in a year. That's why even German law dictates that a service needs to announce its cancellation at least 2 years prior. I can agree with some of this. I don't know if 2 years is... It might be a bit too much. There can just be unforeseen circumstances, right? Like a company can just go under without much notice, or a subsidiary could be shut down. I don't know. You know, who takes the responsibility for that? But I can agree some information, some minimum amount of time without announcement needs to be made. And I think if people purchase the game within a period of that announcement, they should have full, complete rights within that time period to request a refund. I can speak properly. Good Morgan. Also, pretty slow will make not safe for work version of your game, right? Do it. So I don't know. I think that this would be a better, this like minimum period of time needed to announce that, and then people within a time period of that announcement can request a refund. I can get behind that 100%. I think that that's fair. That's understandable. I don't think it's too much. Yeah.
Sort about Nissan? No, I think I probably did, but I don't remember exactly what it is. Do you think this is an issue with land ownership? If you don't pay tax on the land that you bought, they'll just take it away? I think that's a separate issue. It's probably way more complicated.
Tax on land. Well, it's like mortgages, right? It's like the bank owns your house. You're paying back the bank. So that's why they can repo it.
But either way,
it's
that's
a whole
my take
separate
on
issue,
it.
though.
I think honestly, it
refund
would be
even if you bought game years ago. No, I don't mean years ago. I mean like if let's take the Crew as an example. They have a 6-month period where they need to announce minimum that the game will be dead. So they announce in January of this year, let's say, and then by July, the game will be dead. Anybody who purchases it within a period of like, let's say 1 month of that, like 1 to 2 months before that announcement, I think should have a right to request a full refund. No questions asked, no amount of playtime, is too much. That you thought you purchased this game and could play it for more time, you can't. So, I think that should be allowed. Even if you've put like 2,000 hours into it, you expected to play it for a reasonable period of time. You can't. I want my money back. I still want Pokemon Uranium, one of Nintendo's many takedowns. Nintendo was way too fucked up with those takedowns.
really good because I think everybody kind of agrees that this is a problem in some form or another.
Yeah.
And I think it's not really productive that everybody is like trying to look at like who's wrong. Like it should be more of a collaborative effort, because I do think this is something that affects all gamers and all people that play games. And it doesn't really do people any benefits of like trying to like argue and fight about this. Because like ultimately, I think I want what's best for the consumer. If Ross wants that, if fucking Louis wants that, if Thor wants that, then it shouldn't be an argument, it should be a conversation.
We're all on the same side. We all we all want developers and publishers to be more consumer friendly. I agree with that. And I don't know why. I think maybe Thor just got a bit too passionate about it, and you know, it happens. It happens to the best of us. I'm not gonna like hate him for it. I just don't think that his wording about it was very thoughtful. But you know, it's everybody has a bad take. I have tons of bad takes. Here's the video, guys. I'm gonna share it with you, and I want to go on the website for Stop Killing Games and just read a bit more about it. And then after that, we can work on our game. Want to see Toxic? Go see what Paramount requires. Oh my god, why is this bright mode? Dark mode, please. Okay, that's better.
It looks like he may commit
hey, you know what's up?
suicide.
Thank you for the follow.
Suicide is badass.
No.
The problem with clones is... Oh wait, hold on. But you can see what Paramount did for fan-created Star Trek content. Not as bad as Disney or Nintendo, but the fan film rules are pretty draconian. Jesus Christ, that's stupid. Especially fan films, like, come on, if you're not monetizing it, you're not running ads, come on. Or at least if you're running ads, you know, all the money should go to, like, Paramount, right? They can claim the video. They don't have to take it down. I can understand, and I would be fine with, like, okay, they claim the video because it's their, you know, it's their shit in it, or whatever. Whatever, I can get behind that, it's fine, it's understandable, it's their content, but don't block it. Don't copyright strike it. The problem with clones is if they live a long time, they legally can start owning such IP. That can become a real problem with Nintendo. That's true. There's a problem in some form or another. It's exactly what the initiative says, which is why Thor's take pisses me off so much. I can understand that too. And I want people to know that what I'm specifically have a problem with is the wording of it. I don't have a problem with the initiative or the goal. I just don't see how it's possible to obtain from a legislative point of view. But I'm no expert. I want to have that discussion, and I want to see if it's possible, because it might be. But I don't see at this point how it is. The animation for Follow didn't play. Give me a sec. Oh, yeah, okay. It's because, hold on. It did play. It's because my chat is linked up in the same group as my, oop, that's not the right one. It's in the same group as my alerts. So if I move my chat up to the upper right, I'd still have to fix that. Sorry about that. He says he understands what initiative is, but he doesn't get it at all. I highly recommend reading how this works. Okay, read it. It's probably similar to like the petitions for the US, right? Or like the White House is forced to make a statement if an initiative gets enough support. Something like that. I'll play this at 1080p. There we go. Okay, step one, another light page. Is asking for EU legislation to be passed the best way to achieve your goals? Yes, I do believe it is. Set up a group of organizers. Okay. Get your initiative registered. Okay, that's pretty fair. Get support. You need to get support of at least 1 million EU citizens, with thresholds in at least 7 EU countries. You can collect on paper or online. You have 12 months to collect statements. You need to be at least 16 in some countries, and they need to be EU citizens. So even I can't sign it, but I live in the EU. We did ban an MMO for Thor's game jam. That means our game will be fucked since I'm from the EU. Or, ban, I don't know why. We did an MMO for Thor. That means the game will be fucked since I'm from the EU. Oof. Once you've submitted your initiative, so once they get 1 million, within 1 month you will meet with representatives of the commission so you can explain the issues raised in your initiative in detail. 3 months you'll have opportunity to present your initiative at a public hearing at the European Parliament. Parliament will also hold a debate in full session, which could lead to an adopting a resolution related to your issue. Within 6 months, the Commission will spell out what action, if any, it will propose in response to your initiative, and its reasons for taking or not taking action. This is still the thing, is that there are 2 things that need to happen right now within this 12 months. Number 1, players and EU citizens who care need to sign this petition. Number 2, developers and people with more knowledge of how this might affect the industry need to speak out so that when he presents his findings to the EU Commission, that he has a plan of action that he can provide. Because I don't trust legislators to know whatever the fuck they're doing about games. I'm sorry, I don't trust government, I don't trust legislators to know anything about how to protect gamers or game developers. So having a discussion is 100% important here. I'm understanding how the genre and country county origin of your game will affect your standings if bias isn't in the picture. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's... Hey, Mikhail, thank you for the follow. Egg. So let me read this, because I get more of how it works. It's very similar to like the US petitions that you can sign. I want to see a bit more about specifically the FAQ and what they're trying to achieve here. Trust the EU legislators to seek out experts as they've done for similar consumer protection laws. I still don't trust it. I still don't trust it. I don't want the cost of games to go up for me. Because if the cost of games goes up for me, I need to sell more units or I need to increase the price of my games. That's just a raw reality. That if the price of my games go up by 25%, I need to either get 25% more sales or I need to generate 25% more money from the sales in some way. And I don't think that in a lot of cases, you're magically going to have 25% more interested players appear the moment a law gets passed. So now it changes the way that I need to develop my games, I need to market my games, and in a lot of cases, the way that I price my games. And I don't want to do that. I want to price my games fairly. How are publishers destroying video games? An increasing number of video games are designed to rely on a server the publisher controls in order for the game to function. Not always the publisher, but generally, okay. It acts as a lifeline for the game, yes. And it's more than one server, by the way. When the publisher decides to turn this off, it is essentially cutting off life support for the game, making it completely inoperable to all customers. Companies that do this often intentionally prevent people from repairing the game, also by withholding vital components. When this happens, the game is destroyed and no one can ever operate it again. Well, they often intentionally do it because they don't usually have the rights to distribute the server. Or they don't want to do it for security purposes. Or IP purposes. I think we need indie devs to talk about this so whoever is going to deal with it gets more informed. We also need at least one large publisher to come to the table too. Agree. What happens if you click sign? Is there any check that you are actually a citizen? That's a good question. I think there's a... I mean, there's nothing that just says I am at least 18 years of age. I don't see anything. I mean, I'll put my... Oh wait, that's the mailing list, dude. I'm retarded. I'm retarded. Oh, whatever. I'll get the mailing list too. Go here. Okay, step 2. Select language. Select the... Okay. You probably have to put a pestle number in. Use EID of your country. Technically, I have an EID. I have a pestle number. But the thing is, you can get a pestle number without being a citizen. I don't know if they would disqualify me. Based out of Vegas. No, I'm just seeing if they have a official way to confirm that you are a EU citizen. I'm just curious about it because somebody asked. So we can go broke before the publisher. So yes, it's usually them starting the convo. Yes. Our teamwork specifically on multiplayer stuff, even fun little projects can end up being nightmare because of the law, like your Game Jam game. Most publishers don't even know what a server is. It's a dev choice. Yeah. I mean, publishers might have like the final say on certain things regarding the game, but it's usually the developers that are handling the server, right? The publishers don't own server architects. It's the developers that are doing that. I think that the petition is trying to target game as service due to its online aspect. I'd be way more interested if the company would encourage to release game for free after a couple of years. I think Bethesda does it in 2009 to commemorate the 15th anniversary of the Elder Scrolls franchise. Daggerfall was made free to download. But even then, it's like you still have the same issues. It may well be that the EU decides on a similar setup as the DMA, with gatekeepers platforms, where they designate offenses large and egregious enough to have to worry about this. That would lead to most smaller devs not having to worry, which is not ideal, but better than nothing. It's possible, but at a point where the law is being handled on a case-by-case basis, and it's vague enough that you could be targeted, publishers will still not want to take the risk, in some cases, to publish a multiplayer game, because they could be held legally accountable in the future for it. In which case, they would just say, no, we don't want to work on a multiplayer game because we don't want to have to worry about that. We would have to retain more lawyers. We would have to potentially front millions of dollars in costs, especially in damages to players. We're just going to publish some single player games. Way, way easier. I'm going to skip some of these that I don't think really target my concerns. Aren't you asking companies to support games forever? Isn't that unrealistic? No, we are not asking that at all. We are in favor of publishers ending support for a game whenever they choose. What we are asking for is that they implement an end-of-life plan to modify or patch the game so that it can run on customer systems with no further support from the company being necessary. It doesn't work like that, though. Like I've said, a game can just fuck up with modern operating systems. When Oblivion was released on PC, it was working. Now it isn't because it's just too old. The engine is just too unstable. So, like, we agree it's unrealistic to expect companies to support games indefinitely and do not advocate for that in any way. But then this doesn't make sense. You're saying you expect developers to have an end-of-life plan so that customers can run it on their systems with no further support from the company being necessary. But then you say we agree it is unrealistic to expect companies to support games indefinitely and do not advocate that for that in any way. That just seems kind of like you're saying two things here. You can easily still run Windows 95, and if people want to play games on that OS, they can. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of weird. Would a loading screen be good enough? Final patch. It makes sense. If you're still selling the game currently, then it is currently supported, then your end-of-life plan can still be implemented. But does it say that? There are real-world examples of publishers ending support for online-only games in a reasonable way. Yes, it can be done. But it costs money to do. And if a company goes under because it doesn't have any money, how is it expected to have an end-of-life plan? They mean a final patch. They could be. Here's our game backend. It just needs $50K a month in AWS resources to get it running. Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, that's a really high number, right? But that's still, in a lot of cases, exactly the problem. Like, here it is, but now you have to front all this money, and there's only like 100 people willing to play this game after it's released, so they certainly can't afford to run the server. They're not saying it has to run on all future OS, they're just saying it has to run on the OS it ran on. But I mean, then what's the difference? Like, then you're just extending the lifetime by an unknown period of time, an indefinite period of time. Like, it could, the next day, it could be rendered unplayable by some driver patch, right? Play without the publisher and then no further support expected. It's a hard thing to do, though. It is hard. Problem is the multiplayer part. The games you mentioned are single player. Yes, and if the game doesn't have any single player aspect to it, it could just be empty, right? It could rely on other players to actually be playable. And if you don't have any other players, you pretty much don't have a game, right? Like, imagine, I don't know, let's just use like chained together. It's a bad example, but it's one that does not really function if you do not have another player. Then it's just a platforming game. And the unique thing that made it, you know, fun was its multiplayer. And now you don't have that anymore, so now it's only up. Yeah, Fall Guys. Like, if you don't have enough people to play that game, then it's not the same. You'd have to, okay, so code in bots. Well, now bots take time to code in. Now it's going to cost more money. And if the company just went under, are they still obligated? Aren't games licensed not sold to customers? The short answer is this is a very legal gray area depending on the country. In the US, this is generally the case. In other countries, the law is not clear at all, since license agreements cannot override national laws. Yeah, but it's still the same. Steam still works the same. Those laws often consider video games as goods, which may have consumer protections that apply to them. So despite what the license agreement may say, in some countries you are indeed sold your copy of the game license. Some terms still apply, however. For example, you are typically only sold your individual copy of the game license for personal use, not the intellectual property rights to the video game itself. Yes. And that's why hosting private servers is potentially a problem, because you are hosting the intellectual property of, you know, you're essentially modding at that point. And modding is a gray area that some companies allow, even though it technically infringes on their intellectual property rights, and some companies don't allow. Like a mod that puts, I don't know, SpongeBob into Fallout. They're not going to come after you for that. But they could. We can go back in OS version for both server and client. Not necessarily. That's the only reasonable thing to expect. I don't see how interpreting this as has to run on future OS versions, but it doesn't say that. It's not straw manning. It is saying that it's supposed to be working. It doesn't specify that it should be working for future operating systems or for future driver updates. Because it doesn't specify that, I have to guess. Right? And that's where this conversation is being had. It's not straw manning if a specific thing has not been stated. It's guessing. You could say that it's guessing, and it is guessing. Isn't it impractical, if not impossible, to make online-only multiplayer games work without company servers? Not at all. Well, it is. It is impossible to make that. The majority of online multiplayer games in the past functioned without any company servers and were conducted by the customers privately hosting servers themselves and connecting to each other. But you say the majority, but so then you can't say not at all. You can say mostly not at all, but there are still some that technically it's possible with effort. Yeah, if you, like Ed Wilbert said, if you pay for AWS and you know how to host the server, games that were designed this way are still playable today. Yes, if they were designed that way. As to the practicality, this can vary significantly. If a company has designed a game with no thought given towards the possibility of letting users run the game without their support, then yes, this can be challenging goal to transition to, and sometimes impossible, or only possible with significant amount of time put down. And that's money. That's years. If a game has been designed with that as an eventual requirement, then this process can be trivial and relatively simple to implement. We're talking about multiplayer games. There's nothing trivial or relatively simple about them. I promise you, as a game developer, that ain't the case. Another way to look at this could be problematic for some games of today, but there's no reason it needs to be for games of the future. You will inevitably, 100%, unequivocally, without debate, be limiting the types of multiplayer games that can be created if you are forcing developers to make sure that the average consumer can run these at home. 100 million%. Some servers are licensed code as well. How do you open source and other license that you bought? Yep. You can just do can run offline equals true. I think some companies can do some weird net architecture, like Steam network subsystem is really complex routing. Yes. And the thing is, if you network through Steamworks and you need players to be able to run this without Steam, you now need to implement your own solution to handshake and authentication. And while that may not be as technically challenging as other aspects of the networking, that is still a very important aspect to get right. Nothing easy in game dev. I really want to slap people who generalize badly like that. Yeah, this is the thing that this is where a developer reads this, and I think we get worried because we know that this just, it's a noble pursuit, but it is not as simple as it says. And saying trivial and relatively simple to implement without knowing that is dangerous. Like this would force this to stop happening in your server code licensors to include a clause in the license to allow this. I think that would be a good thing overall. It would certainly change how licensors approach things, but they may increase costs. They may stop making it because it's not as... But the law would have to force them to do it. I don't know, there's so many things that it affects. I don't get worried already whiteboarding anti-consumer abuse strategies. Oh god, yeah. I mean, there would be loopholes to this for sure. What about large-scale MMOs? Is it possible for customers to run those when servers are shut down? Isn't it impossible? Not at all, however, limitations can apply. Several MMORPGs that have been shut down have seen server emulators emerge that are capable of hosting thousands of players. Some just on a single user system. Some. Not all will be scalable, however, yes. For extra demanding video games that require powerful servers the average user will not have access to, the game will not be playable on the same scale as when the developer or publisher was hosting it. Okay. Some games require the scale to be playable. I'm sorry, but if I play PlanetSide 2 with 10 players, that's not PlanetSide 2. That's Island of a Planet. At most. That said, that is no excuse for players not to be able to continue playing the game in some form once support ends. But if the game isn't the same game, then what's the point? What's the point? I don't get it. If a server could originally support 5,000 people, but the end user version can only support 500, that's still a massive improvement from no one being able to play it. It depends. It depends. And this is not even applicable to servers that require multiple shards to run. That you need multiple computers in tandem in order to properly play. Trivial and relatively simple to implement, right? Basically saying network engineers' work is now worthless and can't sell their services to devs. I think we should take all of that proposals and make them into encourage, so maybe some tax break or something like that. Maybe. That's worth talking about. Saying the way they sell would have to change. If you change that, I would abuse it. Yeah, and I think developers and publishers would abuse it. They would find loopholes, they would abuse it. In the end, the players end up eating the cost, and we get fewer multiplayer games. And games take longer to make. Because now you're forced to make it playable after the game is finished. And that is additional developer overhead. Like I said, if you need 10 back-end engineers working on this system to play the game after release, you're paying them $100,000 a year because back-end server programmers are expensive. What, 2-3 years of work? So that's $3 million already just in salaries, not including any overhead for having them, or any tools that you might need to purchase. Final Fantasy XIV is an example of what they're thinking, a game that's run on the developer servers with few main multiplayer mechanics. In theory, it seems relatively simple to just cut out the multiplayer mechanics and be alone in a personally run world with only NPCs. It's probably their thought process, but it's not that simple, and it's different for every game. Yeah. I don't know what the servers of Final Fantasy XIV look like. They might use multiple processes to handle the NPCs and handle the raids. They might instance the raids on separate servers. A lot of games do this. They instance certain performance-heavy like modes or maps onto separate shards on different servers entirely. And then you get teleported back to the main server. So they have multiple computers running from the same room, let's say, but you're being transferred between different computers for different things. And one computer just could not handle all of that. Anything that's passed with this stuff will get maliciously compiled to the max. I bet your first thing that what would happen is that you're not buying a game, you're buying that time limited access to the service, which is the game. So you pay $200 for a year of playing, want more, pay up, subscription model for all multiplayer games. It could happen, Alien Rude. Good to see you too. It's been a while. Some games already do that. Yeah. Most account stuff is separate infrastructure too. Yep. You're 100% right, and they do that with extra security to prevent people from like hacking and stealing data, passwords, emails, personal info. I'd like to have a game that have 20 plus years on back and are not used by developers' public domain. I'm a huge fan of finding a way to preserve games, but still I'm more interested in creating positive incentive rather than forcing companies to do stuff like this. Yep. And this is really going to hurt the developers that can't openly afford it, which is like smaller indie devs making multiplayer games. Because now you're not expected to make a multiplayer game. You're expected to make a multiplayer game and a server that can handle all that. And that is a lot of overhead. Just do always peer-to-peer. I mean, peer-to-peer certainly helps, yeah. It 100% helps. But it isn't always possible. You really expect all features in an online-only game to work when support ends. Not necessarily, true. We understand some features can be impractical for an end user to attain if running a server only an end user system. That said, we also see the ability to continue playing the game in some form as a reasonable demand from companies customers have given money to. There's a large difference between a game missing some features versus being completely unplayable in any form. But I think there's also a difference between a game being completely unplayable and a game being playable. And I think playing a game like PlanetSide 2 with 10 players is not playable. Even though the game isn't, strictly speaking, unplayable. Understand your point about number of players. Sure, the game is not the same without the number of players online, but that's not what this is asking for as I read it. It's asking for keeping it playable in some form. If the official server still exists for a player count drops to low levels, you'd also lose the feel of full servers, but it's still playable. I think it just depends on the game. I think in some cases, the number of players does matter, and a minimum number of players is required to make the game even feel playable. If I run around a solo world of PlanetSide 2, then it's not playable anymore. I don't know. Peer-to-peer doesn't support genres like MMOs. Not the same at all. Yeah, you're right. Who cares about hackers, cheaters, and latency abusers? A lot of games are built on progression systems, which is destroyed the moment there is a cheater. Yep. Yep. Stupid question. What will happen when when Windows 11 is unsupported and Windows XX won't support it? Will developer be still responsible for keeping it playable? Apparently not. If the law would pass, I would totally do peer-to-peer mode in MMO just to fulfill it and say, yeah, that game works after end of support, just peer-to-peer, can't handle more than a couple people. Average Joe isn't going to spin up an MMO server, but the point is, us neckbeards could. But every MMO is different. Every one. I'm by no means an experienced game dev, and with my limited knowledge, I know that when stuff is built a certain way, it is a pain to change it even a little bit. Yeah. It 100% is. You're defining PlanetSide 2 without players is unplayable, but it is. It's just not fun. That's a difference. But define unplayable, right? I am defining it like that. Because I just don't think that a game that is built, that is designed with... You need it to multiple players to even get in there and have fun. That isn't even the same game anymore. Is it even a game? And that's just one example. Wouldn't what you're asking ban online-only games? I don't think it would, but it would make it much more expensive. In fact, nothing we are seeking would interfere with any business activity whatsoever while the game was being actively supported. That's not true at all. The regulations we are seeking would only apply when companies decided to end support for games. At that time, they would need to be converted to have... This is not true at all. You can't just convert a game, a multiplayer game, to now we have made a server that you can run at home. That doesn't happen at the end of the game. That happens at the start, in pre-production. Just like modding support. You design modding support, or you should, from day one. Otherwise, it will take many, many years to implement down the line. This is 100% not true at all. At that time, they would need to be converted to either offline or private hosting modes. Until then, companies should continue running games any way they see fit. This is 100% inaccurate. And I want more players to know this. This is not how games are developed. Especially multiplayer games. You know what one of the first people you should hire when you make a multiplayer game is? A server architect. Even in pre-production, you should hire a server architect. Because that is going to be the most important, crucial person to maintaining the live service element of your multiplayer game. You need to define and design the server architecture from day one. And if you don't do that, you're setting yourself up for a massive amount of problems. I've seen nothing which would prevent someone from assuming it would. You should not read it with what we want. It's stupid to read law propositions with that in mind. You read it with how can someone game it attitude. And the publishers will. If you think that Ubisoft is scummy and is fucking over players, which I agree, they will find every loophole they can to fuck over players with these laws. It will not affect them. They will find ways around it. Literally kind of launch the game and start moving around is unplayable to me. Everything else is nice to have after a game is out of support. But do you think that it's worth the additional amount of money that it will cost to develop a game just so that you can run around in PlanetSide 2, for instance, and not do anything in it? Do you think that that is worth you paying another $5 to $10 for the game, or paying a larger subscription fee, or microtransactions being more expensive? We should just focus on ending always online DRM for single player games instead of this broad initiative as it is. I still want to play Fuel, have the DVD, but don't want to have to download some shady third-party patch from a Google Drive. True. Fuel is fun, by the way. It's seeming more and more like this guy isn't a game dev. He isn't a game dev, but he didn't claim to be. He's just a concerned player, and I think that that's important. And it doesn't make him bad. It just means he needs the help and support of developers to better understand this, rework his Q&A, make a new video about it, right? At this point, when he's asking so many people to support his initiative, he needs help to rewrite these and to make a new video. I know from personal experience that custom servers can establish their own anti-cheating measures, not a literal anti-cheat, but if there's a community that wants to play it, self-moderate quite effectively. To some extent, you will then just have, I think, worse quality of self-moderation in some cases, right? If somebody owns the server, look at all like the Gmod servers or CSGO servers that are self-hosted. You get banned for anything. It's not a rule, but it happens. You need the server guy to say, no, that's stupid, so people don't waste time. Yes. You gladly pay $10 extra for every game if I can be sure I can play it in some form after the dev publisher stops supporting it. But the problem is, will every player do that? Will you take a $70 game and now pay $80 in order to play, what is it? Not Sea of Thieves. Skull and Bones. A truly quadruple A experience after the servers are taken offline. I don't think it's bad because he's not informed at all and will hurt consumers. Irresponsible movement. Yes. I think he just needs to be working with more developers that know what they're talking about. It seems like he didn't do enough research and talk to the right people. I agree. The initiative is good. Like the goal. It's a noble goal. Like, I wish there was nobody in poverty. How do we achieve that though? Right? Apples to oranges, right? But still, it's kind of the same thing of, I wish that people could play games even after their servers went offline. Okay. But why do servers go offline? Why? What are the reasons for it? And we need to target those reasons or understand them in order to write effective legislation. And in some cases, it's just that it's too expensive to maintain servers. In a lot of cases, that's the reason, right? There aren't enough players to support paying for these servers. Well, okay, players can host the game, but now it's expensive for them too. Now they have to pay AWS. That's easy. Let's take a while. How to make a compliance with your proposition. Make 10 by 10 meter maps with a single enemy. Now make it so you can click play in the main menu and spawn you into the map, that enemy with level 1 mage. Should be nice and relatively cheap to make. Probably I can make it even cheaper if you give me some time to think. I think if you brought up all these financial issues to proponents of the initiative, they'd tell you, not my problem. They would. You're right, Kent. They would. The thing is, it will be their problem. Because they will pay for it. The players will pay for it. And if players are okay with that, sure. But they will pay for it. We should host MMOs that just work on themselves, would literally be the same goal, which is impossible. Yeah, I mean, it would be cool. I like the idea of like private servers and stuff, but it's just, I know it isn't always tenable. Asheron's call went offline because of an ancient version of a SQL server that was expensive to pay Microsoft for. Yep. That's one example. I think we're getting CC development today. No, we will. We still have 4 more hours of dev at least. Is it unreasonable to ask this of free-to-play games? While free-to-play games are free for users to try, they're supported by microtransactions, which customers spend money on. When a publisher ends a free-to-play game without providing any recourse for the players, they're effectively robbing those that bought features for the game. Well, yeah, it's digital. You don't own anything. You're buying fake, sexy dresses. Okay, what did you expect? They should be accountable to making the game playable in some fashion when support ends. Our proposed regulations would have no impact on non-commercial games that are 100% free. Okay, but then players have to make money to pay for these servers. And if they're willing to pay for it, sure, but I mean, I can't imagine how expensive Genshin Impact servers are to run. Do you have any individual NPCs you would have to simulate at one time? Jesus Christ. What do you mean fake? They're real? You could walk around alone on the WoW maps and fight enemies and talk to NPCs and be fine. Okay, but what about games, Laudmo, that you literally need other players? That there are no bots in the game, there are no NPCs, you play with other players. That is the entire point of the game. Just call my waifu collection fake. Wouldn't what you're asking force the company to give up its intellectual property rights? Isn't that unreasonable? No, we would not require the company to give up any of its intellectual property rights, simply to allow players who purchase the game to continue running it. So if they have intellectual property rights, they could stop people from running their servers because they own the rights. Especially if the servers are monetized. I don't get it. Aren't companies unable to do this due to license agreements they make with other companies that expire, like with music, other software product brands, etc.? No. Yes. While those can be a problem for the industry, those would only prohibit the company from selling additional copies of the game once their license expires. They would not prevent existing buyers from continuing to use the game they have already paid for. That's 100%, 1,000,000% not true. The players, when they buy a game, do not have a license to the tech being used in the game. They're licensing the game from the developers, who themselves have a license to distribute the game with that tech. The moment you allow players to have that tech, the players would need to have a license to run and distribute that technology too. And they do not. So that is 1,000,000% not accurate to law. Rights there would have to be irrevocable and permanent license for the purpose of running the servers only. It would change the way you would have to handle licenses for servers. Like, this would definitely not be backward compatible with games. If this legislation were passed, it would not be backwards compatible. It would only apply to new games. And I think you would have to dramatically change IP laws in order to pass this dramatically. They're IP holder, they're responsible for the product, they're only entity that can force private server to be closed. Yeah. But they're not responsible for an entirely separate entity. It's still their IP. For instance, if Blizzard could shut down private servers if they wanted to, because they own the IP to Warcraft and all of the things inside of it. It's their art, it's their code. They own it. They can shut it down at a moment's notice. Would this be a security risk for video game companies? Not at all. Yes, it is. In asking for a game to be operable, we're not demanding all internal code and documentation, just a functional copy of the game. Well, if you're asking for servers to be run, here's the thing. If you're asking for one version of the server to be released, a built version of the server without the code, fair. But then that server will only work until it stops functioning. And it can't be updated because the players don't have the source code to build a new copy of the server. So I don't know what the legislature is wanting to do here. Just a build version of the server or the source code for the server. Because if it's the source code, that is 100% a security risk. 100%. Blizzard used to shut them down. It's a whack-a-mole, yes, but it's still it's still illegal to have those servers because you are infringing on the copyright of Blizzard. But it's the same thing with piracy, right? So I'm just saying they could shut them down, and a lot of games do that. Legislation like this never ever applies backwards. Yeah, I didn't expect it would, but still Just note, it will increase the cost of development and the complexities of development. And that will be passed on to consumers. And as long as players are okay with that, fair enough. Legally, they could not. Practically, it's not like they would travel to Russia to shut down some server. No, they wouldn't. Similarly, governments can legally shut down all crime and practice not. Yeah. But I still think that you shouldn't put here that it's not requiring companies to give up intellectual property rights when it 100% is. Like 1,000,000%. And these are stated as facts in this. It's not stating, well, we don't think it would, but we need to check with experts. It's saying, no, we would not require it. Well, it's not up to you. It's up to the law. And that's the problem that I have with this FAQ. It just states everything as being factually accurate within this. Won't asking for this harm developers? Yes. It is very unlikely and is far more likely to benefit them. Many video game developers have voiced their dissatisfaction with having a game they spent years of their lives working on destroyed by their publisher, being powerless to stop it. Developers destroy their own games too. By having laws requiring the game to function, it would help their work and legacy endure. That is true. It is possible a small number of developers could find new requirements problematic if they were unprepared for them, but we anticipate if implemented, there would be a significant lead in time, giving developers time to prepare for the changes. Preparing mentally and skillfully is different than preparing financially. Two different things. As it is, I hope this doesn't gain too much traction. I think Ross just went too fast through the process and didn't consult who and what he should have. I hope he can come back with a more informed mindset than I wanted to take off. From what he said, he seems very willing to talk about this. So, you know, I'm being harsh about what it's said here, but I want to talk to him, and if I can help him and just provide some of this alternative perspective, and hopefully that would help this look better and maybe make a new video that is more informed. It's a win for everyone. It's a win for everyone. How long a lead time? Games can take 5 or 10 years to make? Yes, they can. And does it apply for current live service games that are already in development? Because I promise you, At least one of them will shut down if this passes. Because they only have the barest minimum amount of money to keep the game going right now. And if they have to hire more people to work on this new self-hosted server, they can't do it. So it's done. Won't this bankrupt video game companies? It is extremely unlikely. No, it's not. It is likely. A lot of game companies already don't have a lot of money to work with. They're working on paychecks, so to speak, from the publishers. Costs associated with implementing this requirement can be very small, if not trivial. False. Furthermore, it often takes a company with large resources at its disposal to even construct games of this nature in the first place. That's true. Small developers with constrained budgets are less likely to be contributing to this problem. Not true. Not true at all. They're already broken in debt. Yes, I mean, we have record number of layoffs and companies closing because they don't have money. I mean, what? Again, it's a problem that these are stated as factual, and it's not factual. It's not trivial at all. It is not trivial. It is so non-trivial. Studios don't have money, publishers do. Yeah, in most cases, yes. And it's like if publishers have to front more money for the development of these games, it's just more risk, which means that fewer multiplayer games will be made. Does this mean publishers will have to release copies of the game to ban players for hacking or disruptive behavior? Not while the game is being supported. But they still have to develop the backend. They still have to develop the servers as they develop the game. As I mentioned, you can't just develop a self-hosted server for a 10-year-old game magically after you're done deciding to support the game. It doesn't work like that. All our measures are focused on what becomes of the game once support ends. So if disruptive players are in an online-only game become banned, but regular players may continue playing with active support, they would not be entitled to run the game offline until support officially ended, which could be many years later. Okay, I mean, yeah, I guess. And this is my problem with it. It's just that it states a lot of things as fact that are absolutely not factual. And it mentions that these costs and the impact to developers are trivial when they are not trivial. I don't know why we are fighting for games like this. Like, there are good issues in games, but we're not tackling them. Just focus on one of the most unrealistic and hard thing to do. Like, we can just force them to not take single-player game access to players due to weird DRM. We can fight with old games getting their source code deleted, or you can fight with single-player games that are marketed as single-player game that need internet connection and after 2 years unplayable. Yeah. I agree, 100% with all those that I think should be tackled first. Interest rates for game funding broke past year, which has been affecting everyone. One of the reasons for the layoffs. Yeah. I'm sorry, but we need to start bringing costs of game development down, not up. Down. And especially for indie developers, that cost needs to go down. This would not decrease development costs for anyone. It would increase development costs. And increased development costs equals increased prices of games. And increased monetization methods. Simple as that. Expectation keeps going up for quality as well. Yep. Although quality is different than necessarily like fidelity and breadth of the game, right? And I'm sure that's what you meant, right? It's just that like fidelity and breadth of what the game can do are going up, which is increasing price. You can still have a great quality game that is simple and fair in scope. Either way, I do think you should sign this initiative. I just think that, hopefully this was a 3.5 hour video. I apologize. I don't think anybody made it this far, and I'm sure I'm going to get some downvotes for siding with Thor on this, but just know he's not entirely wrong. I just think that some of his language with talking about it was incorrect, or just not maybe the greatest. Know what you're signing. If we have a interview with Ross, which I would love to have, I will try to bring up some of these issues and see if maybe this will give him more to think about, or ways to change the FAQ to be a bit more accurate, and maybe we can push this forward in a better way, right? So that would be great. Either way, I'll end the YouTube video there. Thank you so much for everybody watching that. And if you're interested on Twitch, keep watching, because we're going to jump over to our games development, Cauldron Chronicles, right now. Bye, YouTube.